All right, welcome back, everyone. I will get started and just orient us while everyone is still getting fully logged in. Good afternoon. We're back. It is November 8th, and this is the afternoon session of the second day of the hearing on the pending petition for change by the City of Solvang of Water Right Permit 15878. And where we left off before the lunch break was with the cross-examination of Mr. Gibson. And I believe Ms. Beal had just finished her cross-exam, and I was going to turn to, it looks like maybe Ms. Germinario to take on additional questions. Ms. Germinario, do you have questions for Mr. Gibson?
Yes, I do.
Great. Mr. Gibson, are you ready to get started again?
I am ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Over to you, Ms. Germinario.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson. So to start out, you're deeply familiar with the City of Solvang certified FEIR, correct?
I am.
And the FEIR does not analyze impacts to Western pond turtle from diversions at the city's river wells. Is that correct?
It evaluated the potential for impacts and determined that there was no potential for impact to Western pond turtle at the well site B.
Okay, when you say it analyzed the potential for impacts, did it look at the potential for impacts from drawdown due to pumping?
It looked at the potential for pond turtle to occur at the site, and it was the determination of the biologist that the conditions at well site B were not suitable for pond turtle to occur there. So,
Okay. I think my question maybe is a bit different. So I was interested in specifically what types of impacts you looked at. So did the FEIR just look at impacts to Western pond turtle from construction and not from diversions?
no, the FEIR looked at both construction and operational impacts.
And so if I'm understanding you correctly, it looked at both of those. It found that diversions would not adversely impact Western pond turtle. And why was that? What was the basis for that conclusion?
uh, for both construction and for operation. It looked at the potential for impacts. First, it looked at is the potential for Western pond turtle likely to occur, and the biologist determined the likelihood was extremely low. Okay, so if it's not there, then the potential for the impact would be extremely low.
Okay, and on what basis was this determination of where Western pond turtle occurred? Surveys or what?
The biologist looked at surveys, occurrences, research on the site, historical data in the area, observations, etc. So, variety of sources of information. Both on-site survey as well as an understanding of the conditions relative to what the suitable habitat would be for pond turtle and other species to be present on site or near the area.
Thank you. And then specifically, do you recall where in the FEIR the diversion impacts on Western pond turtle are analyzed?
Well, again, specifically with Western pond turtle, I think, as I indicated, and I'll restate it, that a biologist determined that the likelihood of them being present was low, so the potential for impacts was low. So there's not a specific analysis, I think, that you're trying to refer to that exists, that here's what the impacts would be. And if you want to assume presence on site, which we did not assume, because in evaluating the site conditions and the habitat, the biologist determined that the presence was probably not likely. So it did not warrant to go further in the evaluation for the impact analysis.
Okay. We'll put a pin in that for now. Let me see. So the FEIR describes some mitigation measures related to fisheries. So is it correct that measure it's FIS-5 includes the creation of an operational pumping plan by the Solvang Public Works Department and the Santa Ynez Water Conservation District?
I believe that is correct. I would have to look at the mitigation measures specifically to see what it says.
Okay. To the best of your understanding and knowledge, has that operational pumping plan referenced in that measure been developed yet?
It's my understanding that the city has developed a number of plans and has provided them reviews. So I do not know the details of the plans or what they would contain. I would have to refer you to the city's public works department on that.
Okay. So as you're here today, you don't have specific knowledge that the operational pumping plan required in FIS-5 has been developed yet?
Wouldn't be required until approval of the project, but I do know as a matter of conversation with the city engineers that they have developed pumping plans. So that's all I can speak to.
Okay. Then Ms. Mullen, if you would please show us Solvang 4. Thank you. And if you could please go to page 31 of the PDF. Great, thank you. So I'm going to direct you to paragraph 57, lines 6 through 8, I believe. Is it your testimony that southwestern willow flycatcher and least Bell's vireo were not expected to nest on the River Wells project site due to small, isolated, and inadequate habitat? Suitable habitat for these species was present 1.3 miles downstream of the proposed location for the River Wells project. Is that correct?
I believe that's what it says, yes.
And this statement was based on Solvang's 2022 addendum for the revised River Wells project, and specifically the PACS report on terrestrial biological resources, correct?
Yes, PACS Environmental completed the terrestrial biological work, and that was, I believe, their report was included as an addendum, as an appendix to the addendum.
Great, thank you. And I guess my specific question is the source for this statement we just read out, was the source that PACS report for this 1.3 miles downstream?
Yes, we would have relied on the PACS biologist and their report to pull that information into the addendum based on what their report stated.
Thank you. And then aside from what was in the PACS report, was there any other basis for this statement about the occurrence of suitable habitat 1.3 miles downstream of the proposed location for the River Wells project? Any other basis for that?
Well, I believe PAX in their report referred back to other historical data, including the Kachuma EIR, that looked at habitat along the river, including terrestrial habitat south of the Alisal Bridge. Historical data, I believe they also looked at not just for habitat, but for uh, observances and occurrences that were reported in the area as well. So,
Thank you. And in that response, you just referred to habitat, I believe, south of Alisal Bridge, but what we just read out was referring to a distance downstream of the proposed river wells location, correct?
well, yeah, I mean, there's two different things there. Okay, first, well, south or west, however you want to call it, downstream of Alisal Bridge, let's put it that way. Okay, is well site B. All right. The PAX report identified that further downstream, 1.3 miles of well site B, there's better habitat than at well site B itself, or suitable for these species. Now, let's clarify that a little bit more. Okay. The 2000 or the certified EIR for the Kachuma project also identified habitat downstream of Alisal Bridge. Coincidentally, they identified the same distance of 1.3 miles. Now, let's not confuse the same 1.3 miles. Okay. The Kachuma EIR measured that from Alisal Bridge downstream, which would have put it about the midpoint of well site B as the start of suitable habitat. And again, that work was done over a decade ago. PAC's work was done, I believe, in the last 2021, I believe. And when they looked at their work, their observation was that while the Kachuma report may have identified habitat 1.3 miles downstream of the bridge, in PAC's opinion and their expertise, that there was not suitable habitat given that it was more fragmented, where the well site B area was, and that better habitat actually occurred farther downstream from well site B, another 1.3 miles.
Okay, so you're saying your testimony is that there are specific statements in the PAC's report that compare the value, so to speak, of the habitat or suitability of the habitat in the proposed project area versus further downstream, correct?
I think they make a relative comparison of habitat at well site B as in regards to habitat available further downstream for these species.
And if we could show Ms. Mullen exhibit CDFW 54, please. Thank you. So, Mr. Gibson, this is the terrestrial biological resources section of Solvang's FEIR, correct?
It appears to be.
And if we could go to PDF page 45 towards the bottom of the page. Yeah, you could stop there. Thank you. So this last paragraph on the page here states the southwestern willow flycatcher breeds along the lower Santa Ynez River, and so on, correct?
Yeah, it starts the southwestern willow flycatcher breeds, correct?
Okay. And if we can go to the next page, I just wanted to establish that we're talking about southwestern willow flycatcher in this section. If you want, can stop there. So then this is page 46 of the PDF. So in the first full sentence here, the FEIR states the most suitable habitat on the lower Santa Ynez River begins about 1.3 miles downstream from Alisal Bridge, i.e. in riparian areas west of proposed well site B, and consists of scattered reaches with well-developed riparian woodland. Is this correct?
Well, that's what it says.
So do you have any reason to believe the EIR is inaccurate as to this characterization of habitat?
Well, I'm not sure what inaccuracy you're looking at or trying to get to. I don't think it's inaccurate. Let's go back and dissect the sentence here just for a second. The sentence says the most suitable habitat on the lower Santa Ynez River begins about 1.3 miles downstream of the bridge. And as what I just clarified a minute ago, that is consistent with what was presented in the Kachuma final EIR as well. That doesn't mean that at 1.3 miles you have the best habitat. It also says it consists of scattered reaches with well-developed woodland. Okay, if you're familiar with Santa Ynez River, you'll know that there is not continuous habitat along the Santa Ynez River, south of the bridge. It is scattered. It is in reaches. Okay, so it continues, whether you want to call it southwest or downstream from that point. So I'm not going to disagree with that, and I don't see any inaccuracies with that.
Then, I mean, it still seems to me that this statement here is not entirely consistent with the passage we read earlier from the addendum and the PACS report in terms of the location of the habitat. Would you agree there's a discrepancy?
No, I say we're talking about two different things, as I explained. When I clarified, what this says, and this is most likely, again, when the certified final EIR was done, it was almost completed contemporaneously when we were doing the work on the final EIR for the Kachuma project. All right. At that time, my firm, not the firm I'm with right now, was doing both projects. Okay. So when we looked at this, yeah, we referred to what was done in the Kachuma project. When the PACS report came back again, 12 years later, 10 years later, okay, they had the ability to reassess, make a different assessment, okay, of what the habitat consisted in 2021. In their opinion, they did not disagree that the habitat begins about 1.3 miles downstream of the bridge, but in their opinion, better habitat exists, higher value habitat exists, and it's consistent with this statement along scattered reaches farther downstream from well site B. So they are not inconsistent and they do not contradict one another.
So is it your testimony that one of the reasons PACS found the habitat less suitable is because it had this scattered nature to it?
No. One of the reasons PACS found the habitat to be less suitable is the fact that it's at well site B, the habitat is not as well developed. Okay. It's there's a small segment of habitat, a riparian area just west of the well site. Okay, there's a little scattering of habitat, along the river, but it's not large enough really to provide in Pax's opinion. Okay, again, I'm not the biologist. I talked to the biologist, they talked to me. In Pax's opinion, it does not provide adequate habitat to provide for nesting and breeding, as well as habitat further downstream would provide.
Okay. So let's see. Did the certified EIR and addendum rely on the Federal Endangered Species Act designated critical habitat for southwestern willow flycatcher in assessing potential impacts from the proposed project?
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
So did Solvang's EIR and addendum rely on the Federal Endangered Species Act designated critical habitat for southwestern willow flycatcher in assessing potential impacts from the project?
Well, I'm sure the biologists relied on those definitions, but they also did site-specific analysis. Specifically with the Southwest willow flycatcher, it was Pax's opinion that they were not expected to nest on site because existing riparian habitation, was really only located on a small band along the river and a small remnant along the well site. So again, it was not really adequate in size to allow for nesting. So, with regards to relying on the federal definition of habitat, critical habitat, a more focused assessment by what PAX completed of actually feet on the ground, provided a better assessment of what the conditions were.
Okay, so just to be clear that I understood that, do you know specifically that the EIR and addendum considered that ESA designation in assessing impacts? And do you know where that was analyzed?
Can you clarify, with regards to what do you mean ESA designation and assessing impacts?
In terms of the specific locations identified as critical habitat, was that considered?
I'm sure it was. I mean, when you work with a biologist, the first thing they will do is identify what the, potential underlying conditions are for any project. Critical habitat. We sort of had this discussion a little while ago with on the fisheries and what the critical habitat designations were. And again, there was a biop that identified the entire river. That's fine, but then we looked at there was a biop that identified more detail. So what PAX would have done was, understand, they're professional biologists in the field. They understand what they need to do. They would identify what the issues and concerns were, what the habitat requirements are under both the federal and state requirements. They would have looked then at additional research as to what, with boots on the ground, as to what the actual conditions are and how they meet the requirements as stipulated in the federal and state requirements. So yes, PAX would have looked at that.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like you're saying PAX would have looked at it, but you don't have specific knowledge that they did look at it.
I'm going to say, when I say would, they did. Right. I've worked with PAX long enough. I know the biologists long enough. Yes, they are qualified biologists. They did. I've worked with PAX biologists on numerous other projects up and down the Santa Ynez River, and I know what the protocols they use for their work. So yes, they would have. When I say would, it's yes, they did.
And so are you aware that critical habitat designation shows southwestern willow flycatcher habitat occurs, critical habitat occurs 2,000 feet downstream of well site B?
I think that's not inconsistent with what PAC said.
Okay, I mean, do you recall or are you aware of PACS specifically actually analyzing that, taking it into account in its report?
Well, if we look at the statement that we have up on here on the screen from the original EIR, you know, the most suitable habitat in the lower standing area begins about 1.3 miles downstream from Alisal Bridge. As I indicated before, 1.3 miles down from Alisal Bridge is about the midpoint of well site B. What you're saying is critical habitat, occurs 2,000 feet farther down from that. That's not inconsistent. Pat, reiterated that in their report that supported for the addendum, and they also basically said, in their opinion, that the habitat improved the farther downstream you went. So we're not inconsistent or contradictory on any front.
And to your knowledge, were U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service protocol level surveys completed at the proposed well site or vicinity?
I do not believe protocol surveys were completed because, in the opinion of the biologist, the habitat at well site B did not support the need for the surveys.
Can you explain that? The habitat at well site B did not support the need for the surveys. What do you mean by that?
Well, their initial assessment of the habitat, they would look at what the habitat existed at well site B. And again, as we indicated before, at well site B, the habitat for southwest willow flycatcher, while it existed, it wasn't extensive. All right. It was small. It was a remnant. Okay. It was located, primarily just along the river banks, away from the main part of the well site. Okay. The remaining portions of the well site did not have conditions suitable for habitat. So, on the initial assessment from that standpoint, no. By the same token, and I believe if we go back, and I'll refer you back to the mitigation measures in the FEIR, and that were identified again, that even though they didn't find it again, that there's recommendations to do studies before any biological studies again before any work would begin. So at this point in time, based on the opinion of the biologist and the conditions on the ground, there was not a need at the time to do protocol surveys.
Okay. And so this initial assessment, this was surveys conducted over the course of how many days?
I'd have to research that. I don't recall what that was.
I believe I saw reference to
they weren't protocol surveys at the time, so it wouldn't have been consistent with protocol requirements, but I don't recall what they were.
Right. So if they weren't, well, just, assuming, I think I recall a 1-day survey by PACS, and I can try to find that, but isn't the purpose of protocol level surveys to verify whether species are in fact present by going through, the procedure to verify that?
If conditions warrant.
What do you mean by that? If conditions warrant?
Well, I mean, if you go out to a site and it's fully bladed, then there's no reason to do protocol surveys. Okay. Again, whether it was 1 day or several days, I don't recall. In PACS's opinion, when they surveyed the site, what they saw on the well site, it did not warrant the need at the time for protocol level surveys. And I'll just leave it there.
So I found in your testimony, if we could go to page 29. Oh, sorry, if we could switch to, I guess, yeah, Solvang 4. Actually, if Mr. Gibson, if you could go back, I think you just described hypothetical, if the survey was conducted and they found, what was it? The conditions that would mean no further investigation or surveys were needed. You used a term and I didn't catch that.
Well, PACS performed reconnaissance level surveys at the site. Okay. The purpose of their reconnaissance level survey was to identify whether or not the site met the conditions or whether or not any of these species that we're concerned with, have the potential to be present or are present that would warrant additional protocol surveys. In their opinion, they did not. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, it's a starting point. So if you look here, and thank you, we're at Solvang 4, paragraph 55. We're at line 4 and 5. So it says here, is your testimony the certified certified FEIR identified 30 sensitive plant species. I'm going to skip some language. In database searches in a walking survey performed on October 7, 2011. Is that correct?
Well, that's what it says. And let's dissect that for a minute if we can. Okay. Because there's really two different things there. A walking survey performed on October 7th of 2011. Okay. And that was well prior to the survey that PACS did for the addendum. And then also a survey of database, which I believe is the California Natural Diversity Database, which would have identified species that are present within the quadrangle and probably some of the surrounding quadrangles, but without looking at this, is probably just within the Solvang quadrangle. So the fact that this is 30 sensitive species, are identified in a database survey, and doesn't mean that they were on site.
Okay. From the language here, though, it seems that as far as just the survey was concerned, it was a one-day survey. Is that correct?
Well, the language here says a walking survey on October 7th.
Okay, so without further information, this indicates the survey was performed on October 7. It doesn't have any other dates, so
I would have
one-day
to
survey.
I would have to refer back to the PACS report to see if there's any additional information.
Right, and isn't it true that, assuming it is a one-day survey, species, especially avian species, can move around? They're not always in one place. They may not always be present. Is that correct?
But they may not nest or roost there, but yeah, they may fly over the site.
Correct.
So from that standpoint, whether they're observed on one day, whether observed on a protocol survey, you may or may not notice them. So at any given time. So as you notice in the next sentence down, in accordance with established resource agency survey protocols, that's how the survey was conducted. So it wasn't a haphazard survey. It was conducted within accordance with the established resource agencies protocols, which would have been U.S. Fish and Wildlife and CDFW.
Thought a question or two earlier, you said they were reconnaissance level surveys. Is that
Well,
what you
I
said?
didn't say they weren't. I just said that were they were conducted by, the survey were conducted and they were in accordance with. I didn't say they were protocol surveys. They were in accordance with. That's what the statement says. So a protocol survey, if you're understanding what a protocol survey would be, we may go out several times over a period of time to do the same work. If in this case we went out on one day, as it says, and what you're indicating it does say, and I'm not disagreeing with that, we would have done the same level of work on that one day that we would have done on the same day in a protocol survey going out 8 or 10 times. Okay, so it was they were conducted in accordance with the same protocols. The bigger question, I think, what you're asking and trying to get to, well, you only did one, in a protocol survey may require for more than one visit. And based on this, what's in my testimony, if a protocol survey would require more than one visit, no, we didn't do protocol surveys. However, as indicated in my testimony, the surveys that were done were in accordance with the guidance of such protocols, although they only happened on one day.
Okay, so it seems, if I'm getting this right, your testimony is that some of the methods that are used in a protocol level survey were used, but not all the requirements or standards of a fish and wildlife protocol level survey were met because the timing wasn't met. You didn't perform all the days of surveys that are set forth in a protocol level survey, correct?
Well, I said to my knowledge, they didn't do protocol surveys. What is said in my testimony is, and I'll just read it again here. The survey was conducted by a qualified biologist in accordance with established resource agency survey protocols as applicable or consistent with accepted survey methodologies for particular species if published surveys did not exist. So that's that's what the statement in the testimony is, and that's what we'll stand by.
Okay, but you would agree that part of a resource agency protocol level survey standard is timing, right? Is the number of days that has to be done in order to determine if a species is present.
If we were conducting protocol level surveys, I would not disagree with that, but we didn't. So what we did was not inconsistent, but by the same token, the biologists determined in their reconnaissance level surveys that based on what they observed, that at the time it would not be necessary to do protocol level surveys.
Okay, so you mentioned this determination of whether whether a protocol level survey was necessary. Would you agree that if a protocol level survey had been completed, you would have more certainty as to whether those species were present?
Well, I won't agree or disagree on that point because I'm not a biologist.
Fair enough. So let me see. We could go to Solvang 4 again. This is page 33.
And while we're doing that, Ms. Germanario, I wanted to get a time check from you. I think we're coming up on almost 40 minutes for you, and we had some questions from Ms. Beal, so I wanted to see where we are.
Okay, thank you. I think I could finish this up pretty quickly. A few minutes here. Thank you. So yeah, if we're on
Miss Kinsey, I just wanted to clarify that Cal Trout also does have some questions.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
I thought you might. I didn't mean to skip you. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Page 33, Solvang 4, that's it here? Okay. And I think it's lines 6 through 8. Let me see. Okay. Sorry, I'm just making sure this is the right location here. Okay, yeah, this is right. Okay, so believe this is discussing the terrestrial species mitigation measures. So is it correct that mitigation measures TER 1 through 7 do not provide a trigger to limit or stop diversions based on drawdown of surface pools that California red-legged frog breed in?
Without seeing the mitigation measures, I can't answer that question.
Okay, so to the best of your memory, those mitigation measures don't have a trigger to limit or stop pumping from the wells, correct?
Like I say, without seeing the mitigation measures, I can't recall.
Okay. And let me see. And I guess lines 5 through 6 here discuss that those mitigation measures 1 through 7 would reduce direct impacts to red-legged frog and other special status species, and they would also address indirect impacts to aquatic habitats. So what's the basis for that statement that those measures would address indirect impacts to habitats?
Well, if there are potential indirect impacts, then the mitigation measures would look at what those would be. Presumably, with any activity that could occur away from the well site. Indirect impacts could occur during, by not properly, putting in SWIP measures or SWIP measures not being effective or whatever to keep runoff from occurring from the well site into areas that may be affected. Um, clearing areas or whatever. So, but I think the mitigation measures that are spelled out would address those during construction activities, and that's when the indirect impacts would most likely occur.
Wouldn't one potential indirect impact be drawdown from diversions?
Well, if drawdowns from diversions occur, and again, going back to the testimony by Mr. Nicely earlier on the hydrology and the work done by Stetson, based on the hydrologist's opinion, the drawdown would have minimal effect on stream flows in the river, and potentially probably have indirect impact on the associated habitat that is sustained by the flows in the river as well.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, I'll just try to leave this point, but these lines here, lines 7 and 8, are not referring to mitigation measures to limit or stop pumping, correct?
No, I believe those mitigation measures are looking primarily with construction activities, in that aspect of it, installing the wells from that standpoint. So again, without looking at the mitigation measures, again, I would have to understand what they are, but I think they're mostly addressing TER 1 through TER 7 are, during construction of the wells.
Okay. Let me see, I think I just have maybe one or two more. Okay, are you familiar with Southwestern Willow Flycatcher Recovery Plan? It's actually CFW 58.
I'm sure the biologists are. I'm not personally familiar with it. I'm not a
Okay, and
biologist. I'm not
to
a
your knowledge,
biologist.
makes sense. To your knowledge, did the Solvang FEIR or addendum rely on that southwestern willow flycatcher recovery plan in assessing impacts to that species?
Well, it would depend on when the plan was published. The FEIR was published in 2012, so I don't know when the recovery plan was published. I would assume if the recovery plan was published prior to the addendum, then the addendum probably considered it, probably did consider it. Okay, but again, I don't know when it was published, and but you know, the biologists who did the work are qualified in this area and would be aware of that plan and would be aware of what it contains and how to use it.
Okay, so just to be fair, as you testify here today, you don't have specific knowledge that that was considered.
No, I said I don't have a specific knowledge of the plan itself. I said that the biologists are qualified biologists and they would have considered that in their assessment, because to be a qualified biologist, they would have to understand what the requirements are to be qualified for their species that they're looking at. So they would have considered it. I personally do not have knowledge of the plan. I am not a biologist.
Thank you. Fair enough. That's all the questions I have. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Germanario. I will turn next to you, Ms. Hall. You indicated you have some questions for Mr. Gibson.
I do, yes, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson. I'm Maggie Hall and I represent California Trout.
Hello, Ms. Hall.
So a handful of questions for you. First of all, in paragraph 15 of your testimony, you state that the area downstream from Alisal is not, quote, designated as a critical habitat management reach. Is that correct?
If that's what it says, I'd have to pull it up and look at what the exact language is.
Miss Mullen, could you please?
You said paragraph 15.
Yes, so it's solving exhibit 4 at paragraph 15. Miss Mullen, could you please pull that up?
And
So is it your testimony that the reach below Alisal Bridge is not a critical habitat management reach?
I don't see that environmental of the Alisal Range and the reach below was designated as, it says, and not the reach below Alisal Bridge was designated as critical habitat in the 2000 biological opinion. So
And
well, no, let me finish if I may. Okay. The 2000 biological opinion did not designate it as critical habitat.
do you understand the area below Alisal Bridge to not be critical habitat?
No, I never said that. As a matter of fact, in my oral testimony today, we understand, and we also looked at the 2005 biological opinion that designated the entire Santa Ynez River as critical habitat. So in the sentence you're reading here, it does not rely on that. It relies and takes a statement out of the 2000 biological opinion. So
And I believe there's there's the year 2000 biological opinion and the year 2016 biological opinion. So are you referring to the year 2005 critical habitat designation?
yeah, the one critical habitat designation for the 5 ESUs for the steelhead in 2005.
Okay, so you are aware that NIMS designated the reach below Alisal, including area B, and the reach upstream from Alisal as critical habitat.
I'm aware.
And because of that, you understand that NIMS has determined that habitat contains physical or biological features essential to the conservation of the species, and that requires special management considerations or protection, correct?
That would be consistent with what that would require.
And is it your understanding that steelhead have to migrate through the critical habitat downstream from Alisal in order to access critical habitat upstream from Alisal?
And I think we, made that, understanding and finding in the work that we did in the 2000 or in the certified EIRs. So, yeah, I mean, fish have to move from one point to another to migrate. So we're not saying that they don't.
Thank you. And I understand, given the location of the USGS gauge at Alisal, that that's used as a target flow location in various documents like the biological opinions and water rights orders. Is that correct?
Can you say that again, please?
The location of the USGS gauge is it's located at Alisal Bridge, which is why it's used as a target for flow locations in various documents, including the biological opinion from 2016 and 2000, correct?
Well, there's locations at Highway 154. There's the Alisal Bridge. There's a couple locations for gauging stations along the river. So, it's how I have to go back in and look at just precisely what the 2000 biop says and how they use those. But there are multiple location gauging stations on the river.
Okay, thank you. So referring to your testimony at Solvang 4, paragraph 5, so the same document. You state that you reviewed the below list, so that includes every monitoring summary from the year 2008 to 2022, which are exhibits Solvang 100 through 114. Is that right?
Yes, we reviewed those documents. The ones that I believe those are the documents that were completed by CCRB in their annual monitoring reports, if I remember right.
Yes, thank you. And based on your review of those reports, only a limited section of the San Ynez River downstream from Alisal is surveyed for steelhead because of private property access constraints. Is that right?
Well, there are constraints to be able to get in and monitor the rivers. So, and there is private property along the river that prohibits some access to the river. So that's that could inhibit the fisheries biologists from CCRB from doing what they need to do. But by this, so how CCRB does what monitoring they need to do, and we review their reports, and we see that they understand that. So I can't speak to how they get access or where they get access at.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, could you please pull up Solvang exhibit 100 at PDF page 176? So this map, which is one of the documents you just stated you reviewed about the annual monitoring summaries, shows that the reaches that were surveyed, and in different colors, the different reaches that were surveyed, and then in blue, the reaches of the river that were not surveyed. And I believe there's a note later in this document about issues with access because of private property restraints. So given this map and your understanding of those restraints, is it fair to say that only a limited portion of the river is subject to survey?
I can't make that statement because I don't know exactly what they did. I'm looking at this map. It indicates a number of reaches in the river, and it doesn't identify what areas were or were not surveyed.
But it's fair to say that not all of the potential habitat area was surveyed, correct?
I can't make that statement. So, I mean, again, looking at the map and looking at the document, I would have to rely on CCRB to make that statement. Yeah, I would assume, I don't have knowledge, okay, that it's not possible to access the entire river. However, I would also assume that the biologists, the fisheries biologists with CCRB who do the monitoring know where the key points that they need to look at, the key times of years during the migration of the various fish up the river and through the breeding and salting of that. So I would rely on them to make that statement. And again, I'm not a fisheries biologist, so I'm not going to try to weigh in on that.
Ms. Mullen, could you please pull up Caltrout Exhibit 7, the 2020 Annual Monitoring Summary at PDF page 70? I believe if you scroll down a bit, it references the historical limitations on access because of private property, resulting in not being able to survey the river. So it's your understanding that not the entire river is surveyed because of these restraints. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm looking for the statement here.
So the bottom, sorry, this section of the LSYR main stem has been historically broken out by sub-reaches where access has been granted by landowners.
And I'm sorry, I'm not following either. I just don't see that language.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
I'm reading it, the quote from my notes. If you scroll down, not showing up on my screen. I think we're not seeing the whole page here.
I see. Here we are.
There we are. Yes. So the reason for breaking up the surveys into sub-reaches is because of limited access. Surveying what they're able to access simply by getting access from different landowners. Is that correct?
It says that the river main stem has historically been broken out by sub-reaches where access has been granted. Okay. It doesn't really say that access has been limited. So in not knowing what was behind that statement and whoever drafted this report is CCRB, Mr. Ryan,
let
Stafford,
me just
whatever.
interpose an objection here for the record. There's been a lot of references to CCRB conducting these biological monitoring reports. And I'd just like to point out that this is a document prepared by the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board, which is not CCRB. So the testimony is misstating the document and it's not a huge deal, but I just want the record to be clear. My client is not conducting these surveys.
My apologies. Combs, not CCRB.
Thank you.
All right. And
Thank you. Well, in any event, despite this limited access, surveys downstream from Alisal do document successful spawning and hundreds of juvenile steelhead rearing in pools based on your review of those documents, correct?
I believe that's what it says. Yeah.
Thank you. So the monitoring reports also document fish rescues when the river has been dry in certain years, including downstream from Alisal near the Lompoc Narrows. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, there's been rescues where fish have been stranded in pools along the rescue where there's not been continuous flow in areas. So, those have occurred.
And the project will result in an average annual decrease in mean annual flows at Lompoc, correct?
Say that again.
The project will result, it's your understanding that there will be an average annual decrease in mean annual flows at Lompoc, correct, as a result of the project?
I'm not sure that's necessarily correct. I think I can't remember what the number was. I'd have to refer back to the testimony for that Mr. Nicely had as to what the flows would be at the Lompoc Narrows.
Are you thinking of the 319 acre feet per year reduction?
No, I'm not. You're the one that's coming up with saying there's a decrease.
So in your testimony, solving for at paragraph 34, could you please pull that up, Ms. Sloan? Solving for. At paragraph 34. The third or fourth line, the third and fourth line of paragraph 34 states a mean annual, a decrease in mean annual flow of 319 acre feet at the Lompoc Narrows compared to 1,053. So my understanding is that your testimony that you do anticipate a decrease in annual flow, mean annual flow at the Lompoc Narrows.
And that's on an acre, 319 acre feet per year at the Narrows. So that would be across, that would be an annualized number. Increase of mean annual flow of 52 acre feet at the Alisal Bridge and a decrease in annual flow of 319. That's my testimony compared to the mean annual flow of the baseline.
Okay, thank you. Switching gears a bit here, I know you're familiar with the final environmental impact report and mitigation measure FIS 7, correct?
I believe so. I don't have it. Don't have it in front of me, but yeah. I believe there are specific mitigation measures for fish in the final EIR.
So the FEIR states that impacts to steelhead would be less than significant through application of mitigation measures FIS 6 and FIS 7. Is that your understanding that impacts to fish could be mitigated through implementation of these mitigation measures?
Yeah, I think the conclusions that I stated earlier is that impacts, there would not be any unavoidable adverse impacts, and any significant impacts, including those to fisheries, could be mitigated to less than significant.
So these measures are necessary to avoid a significant impact on steelhead, correct?
Well, they can be necessary and precautionary.
But without the mitigation measures, the impacts would not be reduced to a level that is less than significant, correct?
We identify the mitigation measures to potentially reduce significant impacts to a level of less than significant, correct?
So mitigation measure FIS 7 required the city to update the conservation element of its general plan and include goals and policies that address the city's contribution to cumulative effects related to extraction of groundwater resources throughout the designated critical habitat reach downstream from Bradbury Dam, and also offer to participate in a regionally coordinated water management solution that protects Omicus. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but if that's what you're reading, then that's what it says.
So, Ms. Mullen, could you please reference Solvang 38? And it's 5.3-63. So 5.3-63.
What
to describe.
Oh, it's on the very last page. That must be -63 is the
Oh, yes.
PDF is only 63
Oh,
pages.
Of course you can.
It should be the description of FIS 7.
Okay.
Okay, so it's right.
Yeah.
So
There we
it's the language that I read, just making sure we're on the same page about what FAS 7 requires.
Yeah. City shall update the conservation element of the city's general plan to include goals and policies to address the city's contributions to cumulative effects related to extraction of groundwater resources throughout the designated critical habitat reach downstream from the Bradbury Dam, and offer to participate in a regional coordinated water management solution that protect Omicus steelhead.
So the city updated the general conservation plan element in 2016, about 2 years after the FEIR was certified. Is that right?
I'm not aware. If they could have, I was not a participant of any updates, so I'd have to look at when that was updated.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, could you please pull up Solvang 119? Should be the general plan update, conservation element, and then PDF pages 23 to 24. Showing the policies and goals, which is what was required to be updated. And this section does not include effects related to groundwater resources through the designated habitat reach, or offer to participate in a regionally coordinated water management solution to protect Omicus, correct?
Well, I'm not seeing it there, but then haven't reviewed the entire policies and goals of the conservation element.
But you're not aware of any update to the conservation element that would implement measure FIS 7, correct?
No, but the city could always update, once the River Wells project is approved, you can update a general plan 4 times a year, and they can come back and update this with a new goal and policy at any point in time in the future.
Okay, thank you. So switching gears a bit, I know we were looking at the testimony from the NIMS biologist Rick Bush regarding potential take of endangered steelhead. So is it your understanding there have been numerous incidents where steelhead, including resident steelhead, have died, reportedly associated with low river flows, including in the 2007 incident report that is identified in the record. Are you familiar with that?
Not specifically, but I know there have been incidences in the river.
So during this time, there were disconnected flows upstream and downstream of the certain pool where this incident occurred. Are you not familiar with the 2007 NIMS incident?
I think I just made that statement is that, I know there have been incidents. I'm not specifically aware of the 2007 incident report.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, could you please reference NIMS 22? NIMS exhibit 22.
If I could just ask for a time check.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ms. Hall, you've been, I think, 21 minutes or in that range, according to my clock. What are you looking at here?
I think this is my last line of questioning, so just a few more questions.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Let's keep it brief, but let's see. I'm not sure you're going to make any headway here, but I'll give you the chance to give it a shot.
And actually on that point, Ms. Kenzie, I suspect after we're done with Mr. Gibson that a few of us will want to address that issue in the form of a hearsay objection based on these cross-examinations. So
okay.
Put that out there.
Noted. Thank you.
Ms. Kinsey, this is Stephanie Hastings on behalf of the Alisal Ranch. I also wanted to just confirm for the record that the motions in limiting that have been filed by several parties, and particularly with respect to this exhibit, are part of the administrative record, and our objections to this document are noted.
Yes, thank you, and noted. That is on the record.
I believe at page 2 of the 2007 incident report, is it, so obviously there was low flow conditions, and the report states that the small incremental increase at the bottom paragraph there, we're not able to keep up with dropping flows at Alisal Bridge, therefore leading to the incident. So is it your understanding then that take has occurred and can occur due to low flow conditions in the river?
Well, if that's without seeing this report, then I'll take it that that's what this report is saying. As I was sitting here looking at this report, it did mention that this was, I believe, and if we could look at the first page, I think it said it was upstream of the Alisal Bridge. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, when we testified just a little while ago on the flows, we indicated that, flows at the Alisal Bridge with the proposed project would increase, while they may decrease downstream, they would increase at the Alisal Bridge. So I'm not sure, how this fits into, the fact that we had a take in 07. I don't know what the river conditions, the stream conditions were at that point in time. Again, it appears to be in the summer. It says June of 26. Okay, 07. So not knowing what the river conditions were, it's difficult to assess, how this bears on, other than, there appears to have been an incident.
Thank you. And just to clarify, it's also your understanding the city is proposing to increase its diversions from an average of what was happening per year in 2010 of 228.8 acre feet through up to 1368 acre feet per year, correct, under its proposed project?
Well, the proposed project now is 1368, which is in line with its historical limits. So,
and that reflects an increase from current diversions, correct?
Current being for any given year, possibly. And I think, we had testimony by Mr. Van den Linden earlier in the week that shows sort of what the diversions were. So, depending on what we want to call current, then it could be an increase.
Okay, thank you. That completes my questions. Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Ms. Mullen, if we can bring down the exhibit, thank you. All right, based on that, I think it makes sense well, let me ask my team. I don't have any additional questions for Mr. Gibson. Either Mr. Anderson or Mr. Wooldridge, do you have questions for Mr. Gibson?
No. No.
Thank you. I will look to Ms. O'Sullivan. I think you introduced the witness. Do you have redirect for your witness?
Ms. Kenzie, sorry to interrupt. Would it be okay if I just asked one question as a follow-up to Lena Germanario's questions?
Okay, you wanted to ask one additional question?
Yes, thank you. Just a follow-up.
Sure, I'll give you one question.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson, you testified, well, Ms. Germanario asked you if you knew whether in the environmental documents, and I'm going to refer to those as a draft environmental impact report and the addendum, the water diversions that would result from the proposed project what am I trying to say? Were the impacts from those diversions analyzed relative to Western Pond Turtle compared to the construction impacts?
Well,
objection, Ms. Kinsey. This question was already asked and answered, I believe, multiple times.
I think we've already been there. Yeah, no, Mr. Puccini, I think we've already been there, and we've been through this, and I do want to move on at this point because I'm afraid we'll get into
it wasn't clear to me, so I was just trying to clarify, but thank you very much.
I understand you're representing your client and you're doing it well. With that, I would like to move up back to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. do you have redirect for Mr. Gibson?
Yes, very briefly.
Very brief. Okay, let's and Mr. Gibson, would you prefer a break now, or would you like to power through?
Hey, if Mr. Nicely could power through this morning,
That's okay.
I can power through this afternoon.
All right.
So, I mean,
well, to all our witnesses, don't be shy to ask.
I've got no place to go.
All right, Ms. O'Sullivan, then it's to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. And thank you, Joe, or Mr. Gibson, excuse me, for all of your time today. Just briefly, if you recall, Ms. Beal asked you about whether other pumpers, as opposed, other river wells, other pumpers were included in the Stetson analysis. Do you recall that discussion earlier today?
Yeah, I believe, yes.
And she referred you to Solvang 4, which is your testimony, paragraph 15, excuse me, page 15, paragraph 31. So if we could have that up, Ms. Mullen.
I'm sorry, what was the reference again?
I apologize. It's Solvang 4.
Solvang 4, great.
Yes. And page 15. And specifically, if we could have paragraph 31 visible. So I just want this to be visible while we're discussing it, since this was what the questioning was about. We've established what cross we were discussing. Can you just clarify for us how other pumpers were analyzed in Stetson's analysis in the FEIR?
Well, as I indicated in the FEIR, there were a number of technical memos, not only technical memo number 6, there was technical memorandums 1 through 5. One of those, I think, dealt with water quality, but the others dealt, with, groundwater and stream flow in the river. A lot of Stetson's analysis, and I worked very closely with Ali Sharuti of Stetson at the time. Ali is still there, a good friend of mine, on what the modeling would consist of. And he educated me quite well on the Santa Ynez River model and what it included and how it was used. So the Santa Ynez River model was used in the FEIR to analyze, pumping by the city and its effects on the river, okay, which would have included other pumpers up and down the river, okay. So the model includes, and we did an inventory, it's listed in the FEIR of water rights holders along the river. We also updated that in the addendum so that we made sure that if there were any changes, we could go back and look at that. I believe there were no changes. But the Stetson used the Santa Ynez River model, and it not only looks at stream flow, it looks at pumping along the river as well. So while technical memorandum number 6, which this paragraph here is referring to, did not include pumping analysis, the more comprehensive Santa Ynez River model does. Okay, so the final EIR would have included pumping by others along the river, both upstream and downstream of the city.
Thank you. And then if we could just go to the same document, Ms. Mullen, if you don't mind, to page 17. And paragraph 34, okay, line 14. And this, I just want to get in front of us. We were talking earlier in your cross-examination, there was questions about this 319 acre foot number at Lompoc Narrows that you see there on line 14.
Yes.
And I just want to clarify, this discussion in this paragraph is talking about modeling and the models and the results from the 2,400 acre foot diversion that was analyzed under the FEIR, correct? Not the current 1,368 acre feet diversion under the city's current project that was analyzed under the addendum.
You're absolutely correct, because if you look at line 11, it starts out, that's a memorandum number 6, which included 2,400 acre feet, not the current diversion, which is less than that. So the current diversion, the 1368, would be presumably a lower number because it's lower than the 2,400 to what Stetson looked at.
Great, thank you. I have no further questions, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Ms. Mullen, if you can, thank you, please take it down. And then I will look to the room based on that limited redirect. Does anyone have any follow-up questions for Mr. Gibson? All right, we're closed. So thank you. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Gibson, for joining us today and for being patient and staying with us. I appreciate your testimony very much, and you are excused. And thank you once again.
And if before I'm excused, I would like to just reach out to Ms. Beal if I came across a little testy this morning. It's been a long day and a long night, so I want to apologize to Ms. Beal and NIMS, and I didn't mean to come across that way. So I appreciate everybody's got a job to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I believe with that, I will turn to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. I think where we're at is that at the close of presentation of Solvang's case in chief witnesses. Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Kinsey, that is correct. And I had in my notes to just check with you about when you would like the city's offer of exhibits. Because at opening, you mentioned you might not want it today.
Yeah, let's not do it today. I think it makes sense to defer that because I want to get through as many of the fish entities witnesses as we can. So I would like to table that and return to it. I think it may make sense to be efficient to do it all after presentation of rebuttal. But if anyone has any objections to that, of course, bring that up. But that is what I'm currently thinking. We do it at a later time and probably really close to the close of the hearing.
That's fine with the city. I just wanted to make sure that we're not
missing your chance.
Yeah, yes. We're not forfeiting our chance to move
No.
everything into evidence.
No, thank you. And Mr. Bivens?
And similarly, I would think that CCRB and other parties who may have case-specific hearsay objections based on the cross-examinations of various witnesses can assert those objections at the time that the city offers the testimony and evidence.
Absolutely, and I think that would be most efficient. It won't be as fresh in our memories, but I think it would be most efficient. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I'll remind you of all of the
okay. Thank you. Are any other comments or questions before we move to CDFW?
I have a little housekeeping matter, Ms. Kinsey.
Yes, please.
With my sincerest apologies, I have an emergency situation I need to be dealing with in about a half an hour. So a colleague of mine is going to appear in my stead. So my associate, Lauren Nowarski, is on the line or should be on the line. And she will be taking over for me about 3 o'clock, and I should be back around 4.
Wonderful. Thank you for letting me know, and I hope all is well.
Yes, it is. We'll be all right. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Kinsey, you may be headed this direction, but if I could request like a brief 5-minute recess before we get started on.
Absolutely. I think it's fair. It's a mid-afternoon break, so let's go ahead and do 10 minutes. We will return at 2:46.
Thank you.
Commence there. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm just flipping through my notes here. All right, I think where we were set to pick up is with CDFW, if I understand correctly. And I don't know how you want to do it with the fish entities. When does it make sense? I assume now is a good time for CDFW to give your opening statement. Does that make sense, Ms. Germanario?
Yes,
Or-
that works.
I'm not sure if it's you or Mr. Puccini. And then turning to the others, Ms. Hall, when do you think it makes sense when you present your first witness? I don't think I have the entire order of witnesses here in front of me.
I think, so our only witness is Dr. Tresh, so I think it would make sense to go after the two CDFW witnesses,
Okay,
but before
but
Dr.
before yours, that makes sense. And we'll
And
do
it'll
that.
be brief.
Thank you. And we'll do the same for NIMS, if that makes sense.
Yes.
All right, then I will turn to either Ms. Germanario or Mr. Puccini. Are you prepared to give an opening statement?
Yes, we are. And we did submit slides to accompany the opening statement, if those can be brought up. And I just wanted to note, for brevity, I will omit specific citations to case law, but we do plan to include those in our closing statement or closing brief.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, Officer Kenzie and parties. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife appears before you today as trustee for the state's Fish and Wildlife Resources and as a party to this proceeding. The subject of this hearing is the petition for change to permit 15878 that the city of Solvang filed with the State Water Board on May 7, 2015 and amended on September 27, 2021. Solvang's change petition would involve well production from a new reach of diversion along the Santa Ynez River and a significant increase in production over Solvang's current use. State of W's interest in this matter is to assist the State Water Board in understanding the impacts of Solvang's proposed project on fish and wildlife resources, which includes special status species, and to assist the State Water Board in developing new terms and conditions to add to permit 15878 to protect these resources. CWW's testimony will assist the State Water Board in resolving the hearing issues in the August 15, 2023 amended notice for this matter. In our testimony, you will hear that if Solvang's change petition is granted, we will see significant adverse impacts to fish and wildlife resources in and along the lower Santa Ynez River. CWW's testimony makes two key points that support this conclusion. First, you will hear that the proposed project will draw down the surface water and underflow of the Santa Ynez River. And second, you will hear how this drawdown will likely cause harm to fish and wildlife resources. We will now provide a high-level overview of key CWW testimony as it relates to hearing sub-issues 1C and 1D. So CWW's case-in-chief testimony of Brian DeMuha shows significant drawdown of underflow from the proposed project. As you will see, Mr. DeMuha's analysis shows that the proposed project will result in significant depletion of Santa Ynez River stream flow with as much as 95% of the water pumped from Solvang's wells coming from the river after 90 days of pumping. Addressing these same hearing issues, rebuttal testimony of Kit Custis will respond to Solvang witness Tim Nice's analysis in his direct testimony, which in turn refines Mr. DeMuha's impact analysis, but we will defer further comment on rebuttal for that stage. If you can proceed to the next slide, please. Thank you. You will also hear the testimony of CWW's biologists demonstrating some of the impacts of the proposed project on steelhead and other special status species. The testimony of Kyle Evans describes the presence, life cycle, and habitat needs of Southern California steelhead and the downward trend of steelhead populations in the proposed project area. It is clear from Mr. Evans's testimony that diversions and pumping have been a key factor in this decline. We acknowledge Officer Kenzie's instructions that Mr. Evans should not go over the information on steelhead life history that the State Water Board covered in Water Rights Order 2019-0148. Mr. Evans therefore will focus on matters the order does not cover by explaining the current regulatory status of steelhead, the location of critical habitat for steelhead within the proposed project area, the inadequacy of mitigation measures in Solvang's final EIR and addendum to protect steelhead, and that the species is in significant decline in this watershed. The case in chief and rebuttal testimony of Han Sin describes the presence, habitat, and population trends of terrestrial special status species in the proposed project area based on California Natural Diversity Database data, survey data, and other information. Southwestern willow flycatcher and least Bell's vireo are listed as endangered in the State and Federal Endangered Species Act. Western pond turtle is under review by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the federal ESA and is a state species of special concern. And California red-legged frog is listed as threatened under the federal ESA. Mr. Sin's testimony makes clear these species need certain levels of underflow and riparian vegetation to support their continued existence. Mr. Solvang's proposed water diversions pose a significant threat to these species. Mr. Sin demonstrates that suitable habitat for southwestern willow flycatcher and least Bell's vireo occurs at Site B. He also shows that findings in the final EIR and addendum are inconsistent regarding the location of suitable habitat for those species. A critical takeaway from Mr. Sin's testimony is that the riparian system along the lower Santa Ynez River is already stressed, and the analyses submitted by the hydrogeology experts in this proceeding, including Solvang's, all agree that the proposed project will cause further declines in underflow levels. Mr. Sin's testimony shows that any further drawdown is likely to lead to further losses of these special status species. And then pertinent to CWW's testimony, the State Water Board, in considering Solvang's change petition, must consider its obligations under the Reasonable Use Doctrine, CISA, and Public Trust Doctrine. So first of all water rights, including permit 15878, are subject to the Reasonable Use Doctrine. These provisions prohibit the waste and unreasonable use of water and authorize the State Board to take all appropriate proceedings and actions to prevent such waste and unreasonable use. Under case law, what amounts to an unreasonable use depends on the circumstances, and the State Water Board may find that a particular use may be unreasonable based on its impact to fish and wildlife. In the Stanford Vina case, a state court of appeal held that the State Water Board has broad authority to regulate the unreasonable use of water by various means, including by establishing minimum flow requirements to protect life stage needs of special status fish species and declaring diversions of water unreasonable where diversions would threaten to cause the flow of water in the river to drop below levels required to support those life stage needs. And then under CISA, under case law, the fundamental purposes of CISA are to conserve, protect, restore, and enhance protected species and the habitats upon which they depend for survival. The legislature declared a state policy that all state agencies, boards, and commissions shall seek to conserve endangered species and threatened species and shall utilize their authority in furtherance of CISA's purposes. Under case law, the Public Trust Doctrine protects fisheries in both navigable and non-navigable water bodies. A state court of appeal held that the Public Trust Doctrine also applies to wildlife. And the State Water Board, in considering water allocations, must protect public trust uses to the extent feasible and consistent with the public interest. The State Water Board also has a continuing duty of supervision over water appropriations and use and has the authority to reconsider the impacts of long-standing diversions on public trust resources in light of current information or needs. So considering the CWW testimony just summarized, it is clear that Solvang's proposed project will cause harm to public trust resources by significantly depleting surface water flows and underflow in the proposed project area. This will adversely impact or destroy terrestrial and aquatic habitat that supports special status species, and such harm is unreasonable, may result in unauthorized take of CISA and federal ESA listed or candidate species, and will fail to protect public trust resources when feasible. If we can move to the next slide. Then as to hearing issue 3, the case in chief testimony of Brian DeMuha supports a bypass flow requirement to ensure protection of steelhead and a maximum underflow depth requirement to protect riparian vegetation and special status species. Mr. DeMuha's testimony also supports CWW's proposed well operating design and underflow monitoring terms. The rebuttal testimony of Kit Custis supports those recommended terms by Mr. DeMuha and adds refinements that respond to Mr. Nicely's new analysis, and we will go into more detail on that on the rebuttal stage. And the case in chief and rebuttal testimony of Hans Sin also support underflow monitoring requirements and conditions to limit or shut off pumping if groundwater levels drop below levels that are needed to support riparian vegetation. These measures are critical to protecting special status species that depend on that riparian vegetation. And then the testimony of cow trout and nymphs will provide further support for the proposed permit terms jointly submitted with CWW. And CWW will provide input on the additional hearing issues raised by the State Water Board's AHO in our closing brief. And we conclude by respectfully requesting that if the State Water Board approves Solvang's change petition, it includes CWW, cow trout, and nymphs proposed conditions in permit 15878 to ensure the viability of public trust resources, including special status species in the proposed project area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Germanario.
And if I may, I believe we're going to have my colleague Stephen Puccini introducing our first witness, I believe Brian DeMuha.
Is that correct, Mr. Puccini, Mr. DeMuha?
That is correct.
Wonderful. And I see Mr. DeMuha on screen. So at this time, I will administer the oath. First of all, Mr. DeMuha, welcome and good afternoon. If you would please raise your right hand. Mr. DeMuha, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Mr. Puccini.
Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce Brian DeMuha. Mr. DeMuha has submitted direct testimony that's proceeding as an engineering geologist expert to evaluate the potential impacts of the revised River Wells project on the surface and subsurface flow of the lower San Ynez River. Mr. DeMuha's direct testimony is marked as Exhibit CDFW-101. Mr. DeMuha also submitted a slide presentation that summarizes his direct testimony. This summary is marked as Exhibit CDFW-100. And finally, Mr. DeMuha submitted errata to his direct testimony marked as Exhibit CDFW-101-errata. Mr. DeMuha, before you present your summary, do you want to make any changes or corrections to your direct testimony at this time?
Yes. For my assessment on the, maybe I should say the percentage that I used on my proportion for the 920 gallons per minute was incorrect.
Okay, before you proceed, let's find where you're referring to in your direct testimony so everyone can follow along. Can you identify the page number and perhaps the line?
Yeah, let me get here real quick. So if we go to section 13.
Paragraph 13 on page 9.
Looks like page 11 on my PDF here.
Okay, the paragraph 13 on the left, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's line 7, 8, and 9.
Okay, do you want to read that for us or explain as best you can what the change or correction is that you'd like to make?
Sure. So the original proportion that I applied to The pumping was an overestimation of what it should have been. And so I did correct that using a different proportion that is more appropriate for the analysis. And so the numbers that I provided for drawdown decreased.
Okay, can we be a little more specific? Are you referring to the calculation of 920 divided by, I think it's 550 GPM?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Ms.
I'm
Kinsey,
sorry,
I'm going to
I
have to
don't-
object here. It seems like Mr. DeMucha is completely changing his math and calculus from his direct testimony. And that would be the first that I'm hearing of that, and is a substantial change from his direct testimony. And I would say his attempt to summarize that right now is outside the scope of his direct testimony.
Yeah, Ms.
Let's get to the bottom of it. So maybe Mr. Puccini, first of all, I still don't understand what section we're talking about here. So, and maybe because it's not on my screen, what portion of the testimony, if we can be more specific about exactly what portion of the testimony is changing, that would be a start.
Thank you. And I am looking for that as well.
Great.
So I think if you scroll down,
So I think that we should be on page 11,
yeah.
as I understand.
And so right above paragraph 14, lines 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay. You're referring to the 920 GPM over 2.05 CFS?
Correct. And those were the results for the maximum drawdown at a distance of 200 feet. And so that's what I'm talking about as being amended or corrected.
Okay, so specifically, what of those two numbers would you change?
So at year one, a distance of 200 feet, the drawdown, and let me go back to my graph here.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking you that. It sounds like there was a particular, the 920 over 2.05, I believe, is what you're referring to. Is it your testimony now that the 2.05 CFS was the incorrect number?
Well, the 920 is the same as 2.05 CFS. It's just a different unit of measurement. The correction that I'm talking about is the proportion that I applied to come up with the estimates for the drawdown at 920. So originally I used a proportion which was looking at difference between, or the proportion between 550 gallons per minute and 920 gallons per minute, when what I should have done was looking at a proportion of 920 gallons per minute to 2,200 gallons per minute.
Okay, so that's the correction you're trying to make, is you want that to be, instead of essentially 920 GPM over 550 GPM, it should have been 920 GPM over 2,200 GPM. Is that your testimony?
Correct, and it changes the percent that I used to apply to get my drawdown estimates.
Okay. Ms. Kenzie, is that clear enough? And I apologize, I know this is a little bit unusual, but
Yeah, no, it's actually not unusual. I think because, and we will have a chance, I believe that Mr. DeMuha has rebuttal testimony, doesn't he as well? Is that correct?
No, he does not.
He's not. Okay, so this is our check. Well, we may call him back if there is a surprise element here. Although it sounds like my next question is going to be, then Mr. DeMuha, it sounded like your numbers also in the last two sentences on the page also change. Is that
Correct?
So
Correct.
what is your testimony today as to how those should read?
So at year one, the corrected value would be 12 feet. And at year two, the corrected value would be 18 feet.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, 16 feet.
and
So yes, Mr. Puccini.
just by way of clarification, but stop me if I'm going too far. Mr. DeMuha, my understanding is that the reason you or the basis of this error is you were looking at the 4 wells in the Stetson TM6 Is that correct? And each of those wells is 550, was at 550 GPM, is that correct?
That is correct.
So the error you made was you didn't multiply 550 by 4 to reach 2200.
Correct.
You instead use 550, which is on a per well basis, and that's what threw your calculation off. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So Ms. Kenzie, with that, we just wanted to, again, to bring that to your attention ASAP, to be very transparent and clear that there was in fact an error made, and just as Mr. Demuha had described. So.
Yes, thank you. And no, these things happen, especially rereading testimony. I will look to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Here's what I'd like to do is, if I realize this is new information on the fly, if you are not able to, after your opportunity today to ask cross-examination questions, if something comes up once you're able to process this information, then let's discuss about bringing Mr. Demuha back and making sure that you have an adequate opportunity to ask those questions. That's my proposal for how to address this. I realize it's new information for all of us. So,
and I again apologies, and that of course would be absolutely fair.
May I be heard? So I would actually strongly object to that. This is essentially new direct testimony. This is not. He's changing his entire assessment of how much drawdown there will be. And at this point, just me providing cross-examination questions is not adequate to respond to that. I mean, Mr. Nicely's rebuttal testimony is entirely built on responding to Mr. Demucha's analysis in his direct testimony. And changing the numbers now, you know, we have no response, we have no opportunity for Mr. Nicely, our expert, to evaluate Mr. Demucha's new calculations. So I find that to be problematic. I can certainly ask him cross-examination questions, and I understand the math that he's talking about because Mr. Nicely lays it out so clearly, the error in his rebuttal testimony. But I think at this point, the fact to let Mr. Demucha provide, you know, new drawdown numbers at this stage, I find to be a bit prejudicial to the city, especially since this error was very clearly laid out in Mr. Nicely's rebuttal testimony, which was submitted several weeks ago. And so it should have been apparent to the parties, at least at that point, that there was a need for a correction, and they could have made that correction at that time or shortly thereafter, rather than at this moment.
Yeah, if I can just be heard, Ms. Kenzie,
sure.
that was not information that was available to Mr. Demuha at the time. This is something that has recently come up. We're not trying to hide the ball, obviously. And as Ms. O'Sullivan pointed out, it was clearly laid out in Mr. Nicely's rebuttal testimony. He already recognized the error, and we're just simply acknowledging it, again, in the interest of transparency. And of course, we can file a RATA if that would work best for you, however you want to handle it. But this is where we're at. I just wanted to bring it up, and you know, I apologize on behalf of the department, but again, I think it's better to acknowledge this now,
yes,
really in the interest of the city of Solvang, because again, we don't want to prejudice their case by not revealing this as soon as we knew about it.
Ms. Kunze?
And
yes,
yeah, and
this is Gary Gustad.
Yeah.
This appears to, I'm just looking at the page 11 right now, and that the error that they're pointing out doesn't appear to be the only error. If you scroll down into paragraph 14, some of the same numbers are contained in that. So there would appear to be additional errors that they're trying to correct in the preceding paragraph. And I don't know if that's pervasive out throughout their written testimony or not.
Yeah, I mean, we do acknowledge that that's going to have a ripple effect, unfortunately. And it would be difficult for us to, I suppose we could go line by line and try to identify exactly what numbers change as a result of that error. But we're all ears in terms of how you like to proceed on this, Ms. Kenzie.
yeah.
Ms. Kinsey, if I may, I think Mr.
Sure.
Kim would like to be heard.
Yes. Yes. No, and I actually let's go ahead and take the exhibit down just for now, Ms. Mullen. It's easier for me to read the room when we're having a discussion. I appreciate it. Mr. Kim, please.
Yes, Officer Kunze, if I may, given the nature of the proposed changes in the direct testimony, and the timing of it, and what our belief as to the motivations or what the causes of those changes are, perhaps it may be best for the submission of a notice of errata as well as track changes, so that we know what the changes are from the original direct testimony and the proposed direct testimony now. And then because of those changes, which are last minute from our perspective, the city needs a chance to have surrebuttal test time as well as surrebuttal testimony on those changes. So we'd like Officer Kinsey to keep those procedural and substantive issues in mind, in response to these changes that they propose. But first and foremost, it doesn't sound like the proposed changes they have end at what we've been told, as Mr. Puccini has stated right now, that there are ripple effects from these proposed changes. So I think it's best for everyone to get some notice of errata as well as track changes, so that we can track what these changes are. And once again, sorry to repeat, but the city does need the opportunity to have the time to assess that as well as surrebuttal on those proposed changes.
And I'll join in Mr. Kim's request there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. Does anyone else, Mr. Puccini, do you care to respond? I think I'm formulating a plan here, but did you want to comment any further at this time?
I found Mr. Kim's proposal, at least as in the notice of errata and track changes, perfectly reasonable. We can certainly submit that, post haste. Beyond that, in terms of his recommendations for more time and surrebuttal of that, I feel that's really your call in this case.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I'm thinking. I mean, it looks like we're going to be in a rush to get through all the fish entities witnesses in the next day, half day, one full day, essentially. Anyway, so my proposal would be to put off hearing from Mr. Demuha and not hear from him today. Allow a reasonable time, whatever you need to correct not whatever you need. I mean, to do it correctly, correct the errors throughout the testimony with track changes and an errata, so that we can all see what those are. I think at that point, once we can see what the changes are, it will give me a better understanding of what needs to be, done in response. Although my initial reaction is to agree with you, Mr. Kim and Ms. O'Sullivan, that it would be appropriate to allow the city an opportunity to respond to that, essentially, that revised testimony. And so we would have to figure out how to build in time to do that. But I think we need to understand the extent of the changes first. It may be appropriate. I wonder if it would be appropriate for, I don't know if it's possible, but if it's possible for us to have a brief status conference sometime, get the track changes and then have a brief status conference next week to see how much time the city might need to prepare a response, what I'm trying to understand is whether or not we can build in so that the city would essentially present rebuttal and if necessary, surrebuttal at the same time, or whether, you would need additional time. But it seems like it's hard to know without having a good understanding of what the changes are. But do you have a response to that, Mr. Kim?
Yes, Officer Kunze, you went down exactly the path that I was going to suggest, that we have some set date and time for that notice of errata with the track changes. And I assume that it's going to be sometime before the end of this week, hopefully. And then.
And just note that at least for us state workers, a Friday is a holiday. So it gets a little tight.
Well, so whatever that deadline is,
yeah.
Then we schedule a status conference, solely on this issue, as well as any other housekeeping matters that may come up about a week after that deadline, so that we have time to confer with our experts and internally, and I think that would be the best way to approach this issue and move on. But I also agree that given the circumstances, that Mr. Demuha's testimony and cross-examination be tabled and go on to another witness for today, so that we can keep progressing.
Thank you. And Mr. Puccini, do you have any comments or thoughts about the approach as I laid out, and then setting aside the question of Sir rebuttal, we can talk about that if we're having a status conference, but just generally the timing and then submitting an errata and then us reconvening.
Yeah, I really can't, in a matter of fairness, object to that proposal. I understand the difficulty this has created for the parties. We apologize for that. I do think we can get that notice of errata and the track changes done quickly. In fact, I'm hoping to do it by COB today, if not first thing tomorrow. So that would be our goal. I don't see that to be a significant lift. So that's our hope. If you do want to set a deadline, that's perfectly fine. But whatever that deadline is, I'm hoping that we can beat it.
Well, I mean, you'll be in the, we'll be doing this tomorrow. So I'm sorry, what did you propose as a,
Well, let me just lean on Mr. Demuha really quickly.
Okay.
Mr. Demuha, in terms of the changes that need to be made to your testimony to address the error that we just described, is it would it be possible, do you think, to be able to get that done, say by close of business today?
Absolutely. I think, there's only maybe one or two places where that value is applied. And of course, I could change my graphs to represent those changes as well. But yeah, it's completely doable.
Okay, then with that, we will, it's hard to represent. We will be done by a particular time, but we will excuse Mr. Demuha. He can go ahead and make those changes and track changes. And it sounds like it can be done by COB today, in which case there should be an expectation on your part, Ms. Kenzie, and the parties to receive those the notice of errata and track changes.
well, let's maybe, I mean, I appreciate that you're very diligent about correcting this. I think I'd like to give you until close of business tomorrow because I want to make sure it's important that we get it right. This right. And I want you to have a chance to look at it. And, sometimes a proofread, I just know any work, at least I'm human. If I do anything too quickly, there's a chance that it'll come out wrong. And this one, I think is worth doing quite carefully and taking a look at it. So if we can do close of business tomorrow to have that sent into the AHO, I think that would be appropriate. And then we can schedule a follow-up meeting next week.
Agreed. Thank you.
That's about what to do next. So with that, I think we should take out our calendars. And I realize this is short notice. I think we can do this meeting fairly quickly. The AHO is open the afternoon of the 15th, as well as essentially all day the 16th and 17th. So on our end, we can schedule any of those days. I'll look to you, Mr. Puccini. Do you have limitations on your schedule?
None that can't be changed.
Okay, thank you. And then I will look to the city's attorneys. Do you have limitations on your schedule or a preference as to when we meet next week?
For Wednesday and Thursday, where the AHO is available, I only have a conflict that I can't change.
Right.
From 1 to 2 on Wednesday. So other than that, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Tilden Kim for the city. Wednesday is fairly wide open. I have several meetings on Thursday. Let's see, one at 8 o'clock, another one at 1 o'clock. So mid-morning on the 16th is fine, and then mid-afternoon on Thursday is also fine.
And Ms. Kenzie, for CCRB, the afternoon of the 15th is great and wide open. The 16th and 17th are completely booked.
Not so good. Okay, so I'm doing an initial proposal of, and others will have a chance to respond, but I'm just putting this out there, an initial proposal of 2:30 on Wednesday, November 15th, that we would meet. Does anyone have a conflict they can't change who needs to participate in that? And we will discuss, and I can put sideboards that we will discuss. Well, if everyone can be there, we can discuss any procedural housekeeping we need, but
Kenzie, I have a conflict that week. Are you wanting all parties to attend or?
It's well, what I can do is say we will meet and we'll only address this issue with Mr. Demuha's testimony so that you wouldn't be prejudiced on any other issue and we won't foray into any other issue. So I can put sideboards on our meeting that'll be limited to a discussion of how to handle Mr. DeMuha's testimony and any response by the city.
Okay, thank you.
This is Gary Kvistad for ID1. If you could do it after 3 o'clock on Wednesday, that would be fine.
Would starting at 3 work, or do you need it?
3 o'clock should be 3 o'clock should be fine.
All right, 3 o'clock we're looking at.
And I can say for me, the 16th and 17th are fully booked, so Wednesday would be the best for me as well.
Thank you, Mr. DeMuha.
You're welcome.
All right, let's plan for a status conference, and I will at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, the 15th. And if you would please, Mr. Puccini and Mr. DeMuha, submit that errata by close of business tomorrow and circulate it to the service list. I'd appreciate that, and then we can go from there. Does that sound, did we address all the issues on this for now so that we can move forward?
Yes, for CWW, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. DeMuha, for now. I think you have tasks, so you're excused for now, and we will see you later on in this proceeding. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Mr. Puccini, do you need a moment to call your next witness?
We're going to leave that to Ms. Germinario.
Ms. Germinario.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I believe our next witness is Kyle Evans. Is that correct? According to the schedule we submitted, at least. So I guess I would start out with the same question to you, Mr. Evans, if there's anything.
Well, let me. I have to swear in Mr. Evans. I also have to.
Oh,
find
I'm
him.
sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, there we are. All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Evans. Thank you for joining us. If you would please raise your right hand. Mr. Evans, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Thank you. You may proceed, Ms. Germinario.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Evans, is there anything you would like to change about your testimony, your written testimony?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thanks very much. Are you ready to proceed with your summary of testimony?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, and I believe Mr. Evans has a slide presentation. You need the exhibit number, let me know.
Oh, if there's an exhibit number, that would be great.
Yes.
That would be CDFW exhibit number 2.
Okay, and yeah, Mr. Evans, feel free to start on your summary.
Of course, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Kyle Evans. I work as a senior environmental scientist supervisor for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Within our South Coast region, Region 5, I supervise our anadromous fisheries program. I have been working directly with Southern California steelhead within Santa Barbara County, including the San Ynez River, for the past 10 years. As mentioned before, significant overlap does exist between the written testimony that I submitted and information presented within the Water Order 2019-0148. This includes things like steelhead life history and biology, habitat requirements, historic presence and population numbers, in addition to declines that have been observed within the San Ynez River. As a matter of efficiency and of course to respect the order presented by Hearing Officer Kenzie, today I'm limiting my oral summary to basically matters that are not directly addressed in that water right order. So I basically went through and I highlighted several different points I'd like to talk about where there were some differences between my testimony and that order itself. The first that I would like to highlight is that within Water Right Order 2019-0148, it states that the juvenile steelhead may rear in the ocean or in freshwater for 1 to 2 years. Within my testimony, based on the best available science, things that I've reviewed and my personal experience, believe that rearing in freshwater may extend from 1 to 3 years within freshwater, and then in the ocean from 1 to 4 years. Another point within the water order, it is stated that the
Objection, Ms. Kinsey. The point by point, I understand that Mr. Evans is trying to be respectful of your evidentiary ruling. However, his testimony does not do a point by point comparison of the 2019 water order with his analysis, and his reference to what the 2019 order says about particular issues is outside the scope of his testimony. I mean,
Yes,
I'm not trying to be
right. No, I understand that. And so the question is how to do this in a way that's, you know, efficient.
Yeah.
May I respond to that?
Yes, please.
I believe a case could be made. I mean, if we wanted to go point by point, to be able to reference material in Mr. Evans' written testimony to support these items.
Well, we can, it sounds like my understanding of the objection is not to his testimony as to what the, you know, for example, in this, what he just said, the rearing in freshwater for 1 to 3 years, sounds like that's in his testimony. It's the characterization of what's in the 2019 order.
That's correct.
Right. So I think in some ways it may be less useful, but it does follow the rules. Mr. Evans, if possible, can you focus on your conclusions and just omit your assessment of what the 2019 order says?
Yeah,
To the best of your ability on the fly. Okay. Thank you.
That is fine.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Within on paragraph 11, within my written submitted testimony, CDFW exhibit number 3, the daily maximum temperature in which we believe Southern California steelhead trout can sustain would be a total of 29 degrees centigrade, with a daily average or mean temperature daily average below 25 degrees centigrade. And this is something that is slightly warmer than some numbers reported for Omicus populations within Northern California or other areas moving north. In 2021, in June, the Fish and Game Commission received a petition from California Trout to list Southern California steelhead under the California Endangered Species Act. Department staff reviewed this petition and determined that based upon the information presented, there was sufficient information that exists that the petition may be warranted. If you wouldn't mind moving to slide number, let's double check, slide number 8, please. Thank you. Currently, the department is conducting a species status review of Southern California steelhead and is likely to make a determination on whether it should be listed under CISA as early as early 2024. One difference, or one key difference between the federal ESA listing and the state CISA listing is that CISA does include the anadromous life histories along with the resident life histories of Oncorhynchus micus, which is the species name that we're currently discussing. Outside of that, they do overlap greatly within their geographic range, and it does include the areas of the San Ynez River we've been discussing. If we could please move to slide number 9, please. To provide the most up-to-date monitoring information we have about the population of these species, I want to first provide a very brief overview of the current monitoring efforts. Now, this figure is something I believe was brought up in a cross-exam by Environmental Defense Center earlier today, but it shows the reaches that are currently covered as index reaches from the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board. The Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board has been collecting data within the San Ynez River since 2001 and represents the best long-term assessment of steelhead populations. They do this through several different techniques, which are each designed to categorize or to quantify a different life stage or different life expression. So, for instance, migrant traps, which are represented here as these kind of orange, reddish dots, these traps are placed in the river and designed to enumerate
Ms. Kinsey, if I may, I'm going to object again as to the scope. Mr. Evans does discuss Combs' assessment of, monitoring, but this map, I don't believe is specifically referred, or if he could direct us, but also the specific explanation that he was just going into about the methods and methodology, that level of detail is not in his testimony.
And I will look to Mr. Evans and Ms. Germanario if we can. I'm pulling up the testimony myself, but if you have a specific reference to point to, that would be helpful.
Officer Kinsey, are you asking specifically for this figure or for description of the methodologies?
A description of the methodology. We'll start there. My understanding is the figure is not in your, well, unless I'm mistaken, the figure is not in your testimony or referenced in your testimony, although it is in the exhibits, as I understand it.
That is correct. I'm just quickly reviewing my testimony to provide that exact sentence for you. So within my testimony, Exhibit 3, this would be on page 13, paragraph 33. There's a sentence to quantify upstream anadromous adult migration and downstream smolt emigration. Migrant traps are placed on the following locations as described. So it might not be quite the level of detail that I was providing in my oral summary, but it does describe the location and use of these traps and what they're trying to do.
I understand. So I think the objection is sustained with respect to the level of detail. If you would, Mr. Evans, you do need to limit yourself to what you included in your written testimony to the extent possible. I know we're asking you to make a number of changes on the fly, so I recognize that, and Ms. O'Sullivan is doing a fine job of pointing out when we stray from that. So I think you can proceed with the understanding that the more detailed discussion that we just had will be stricken with insofar as it goes outside of the scope of the written testimony. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. Evans.
Absolutely. Moving to the next category, as outlined within page 13 of my testimony and paragraph 34, CDFW operates a Ditson sonar camera. Ditson sonar cameras operate as a fixed counting station when deployed in the creek during winter, can provide estimates of upstream adult migration. And then the snorkel surveys and red surveys and biological opinion required surveys conducted by the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board are also conducted within the San Ynez River. So I believe we can move on to the next slide, please. As for the current status, I would like to focus my description basically to the time period from 2010 to present. This is the period of information that is not covered within the water right order. From looking at chart number A, this is a count of the total returning anadromous steelhead. So this is the number of anadromous adults that were counted migrating upstream. This chart is on a log base. So what that means is that you cannot have your y-axis starting at 0. So essentially the line that is 1 there is actually represented as a 0. So everything would just be subtracted 1. So what I'd like to point out was that in 2010, 2011, of steelhead were observed moving upstream, less than 10 individuals. Between 2012 and 2017, there were 0 anadromous adults that were identified either by CDFW or the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board moving upstream. In 2017 and 19, several individuals were identified by CDFW with our DITs and cameras. Figure B is a figure provided by the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board in their 2022 annual report. This includes a count of the total number of smolts that have emigrated out of the system beginning in 2001, moving to 2022. This includes smolts captured at 3 different trap locations that were identified on the previous page. Those individuals, I would just like to point out the very low numbers of smolts that were observed migrating out from 2012, moving through 2022. And finally, the graph C indicated in the lower right corner, these are normalized densities from snorkel counts conducted by the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board. So this was done basically as a way to compare individual sites of going out, and instead of counting the total number of fish, you are looking at it as the number of fish per a specific distance, the number of fish per feet. The highlighted in the top is an orange line of 0.3. This is a density provided by the National Marine Fisheries Service as the minimum density required to avoid or for viability criteria, which
Ms.
has not
Kinsey,
been met.
if I can interject with another objection.
Yes.
I realize this is in his prepared slides. However, the version of the exhibit in his testimony of this, what's labeled as C here, does not include that orange line, and his testimony does not discuss it.
On paragraph 38 within my testimony on page 15, and reading directly, according to NIMS, a minimum density of 0.3 fish per meter squared is needed to meet the population density viability criteria. That is the 0.3 that is referenced directly with the orange line within the exhibit. For the sake of the presentation, I added that line to make it more visible. And my apologies for not including it in the original written testimony.
And I think that's fine. I understand that. And I understand the objection, Ms. Solvang, and in this case, I'll overrule it because it's laid out there. So thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Evans.
Thank you. And so that actually brings me to the essentially the conclusion of my limited oral summary, keeping in mind the evidentiary ruling put forth by yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Evans. And I did want to say before I put you out there for cross-examination, I did read all of your testimony, and this is just as a comment that's entirely separate from substance. I found it very well written and helpful and easy to read. So I commend you on your writing, and I did read it. And so thank you for your brief summary today. That's quite helpful.
Thank you. Just trying to save some time.
Yep. And if we can take this down, Ms. Mullen, and I will look to the room. I think it makes sense for me to start cross-examination with the city of Solvang and then to move to the other entities. So I will look first. It looks like Ms. O'Sullivan, you have your mic off. Do you have questions for Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kinsey. I do have a few questions for Mr. Evans.
Please go ahead.
Great. Hi, Mr. Evans. Nice to meet you today, and thank you for presenting your testimony and for answering some questions from me. I would like to, Ms. Mullen, if we may pull up CDFW 3, which is Mr. Evans' testimony. If we could go to page 6 and have paragraph 11 visible, please. Thank you. So, Mr. Evans, your testimony states that steelhead prefer temperatures between 15 and 18 degrees Celsius. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that they prefer dissolved oxygen levels greater than 5, I believe that's milligrams per liter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You also testify that steelhead have been observed persisting in habitats with daily drops to less than 2 milligrams per liter. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, if you can bring up Solvang 186. And Ms. Mullen, this might help. This is an exhibit that we submitted for cross-examination only.
And that's Solvang 186. Oh.
Yes.
We have it. We're just finding the right folder.
Yeah, I appreciate, maybe for the next one, I'll tell you all the exhibit numbers ahead of time and give Ms. Mullen a chance to get ahead.
Was that 186?
Yes, 186. Thank you. And if we could go to PDF page 38, please, and have the last paragraph of that page visible. So, Mr. Evans, if I could have you look at the last paragraph there and the first sentence. It says the following, excuse me, let me back up. This is a document that's titled Ambient Water Quality Criteria for Dissolved Oxygen by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. And the first sentence there in the last paragraph says the following is a summary.
So Sullivan, can I just pause for a second?
Yeah.
Is there a date on this document? I'm just curious what the date is. Do you know?
It is older. Let me.
I can tell from the font, but
the fact that it's probably written on a typewriter. Yes. It's probably at the top, and I think it's also maybe in the title. It's 1986.
All right. Thank you very much. That helps me.
And so that first sentence there, and I'm going to walk through a few things just to orient us in this document. The first sentence on the last paragraph says, the following is a summary of the dissolved oxygen concentrations in MgL, judged to be equivalent to the various qualitative levels of effect. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and if we could scroll down to the next page, page 39, Ms. Mullen, PDF page 39, I should say. And Mr. Evans, do you see this section 1 titled Salmonid Waters?
Yes, I do.
And subsection B, Other Life Stages?
Yes, I do.
And if you go down to the second to last bullet, you see there's a row titled Severe Production Impairment.
Correct.
And the number there is 4. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm seeing that.
And again, this isn't, I know it doesn't say right there in the table, but the units here are milligrams per liter, correct? Based on the prior statement we read out loud.
That seems accurate. I've not seen this document before. I'm not familiar with it.
Understood. I can represent to you that that is 4 in milligrams per liter. And then the last bullet says, is titled Limit to Avoid Acute Mortality. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
And the dissolved oxygen level there is 3. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if Ms. Mullen, if we could just go back to paragraph 38, or excuse me, page 38, where we just were at the end of the page there, the last paragraph. And that the second sentence in that paragraph says, the value cited as acute mortality limit is the minimum dissolved oxygen concentration deemed not to risk direct mortality. Is that correct? I guess it's this after the semicolon. I apologize, not the second sentence.
Yes, that is what it says.
Okay, thank you. We can get out of this document, Ms. Mullen, thank you. So your testimony used a number of 2 milligrams per liter, and that's less than 3 milligrams per liter, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. If we could bring up Solvang 178, please. And again, this is one of the cross-examination exhibits. So I realize, Mr. Evans, that you have not seen this before, but I will represent to you that this document includes several graphs that are pulled from the USGS gauge at Alisal, showing this one in particular shows discharge at that gauge. And so you can see the graph dropping off there. Actually, we can go to the next one. Thank you.
The next page.
The next page, excuse me. Yeah. I put all of them in one document to try to make it easier. And so this readout from the USGS gauge includes, if you can see at the top there, Mr. Evans, it's showing dissolved oxygen levels at the Solvang USGS gauge. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And do you see that during this time period, we're looking in the summer from, approximately the beginning of July to the middle of August in 2020? Do you see that?
Yes, I do. From July 1st to August 31st, according to the upper portion.
Yes, and then it looks like the actual graph kind of stopped short of that. I think there must have not been data after the 19th or so for dissolved oxygen. And you can see that dissolved oxygen gets down, just over, it's below 4 it's below 4 the whole time during you can see these are cyclical, and it gets below 4 on a regular basis. Is that accurate?
Let's just clarify for the record, I think this is 4 milligrams per liter.
Yes, milligrams per liter.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Evans, you can see that the blue line goes below 4 milligrams per liter consistently throughout this entire period. Is that correct?
Yeah. It appears there is the daily fluctuation in levels of dissolved oxygen. Looking at this graph, I can confirm that I'm seeing the blue line go below the number 4, although I'm not familiar with the equipment, the calibration, or any of the other parameters associated with this gauge. So I'm also not a hydrologist or technician, so I can't speak to the accuracy of this.
Understood. But you do agree that the blue line goes below 4 on a cyclical basis consistently?
Yes, on this graph in front of me.
Yeah. And do you see that the dissolved oxygen level even gets down to just over 1 milligrams per liter on several days in the later August there?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. We can go to the next page, please. And, oh, you can go to the next one, next page. Thank you. That was just a zoom in case we needed it. This is showing for the same gauge during essentially the same time period, the temperature at the LSL gauge. I'll represent that to you, and you can see at the top there. Do you see the temperature being listed at the top, Mr. Evans?
Yes, I do.
Great. And looking at the blue line again, which is showing temperature in this graph, you can see that the temperature at this gauge is consistently above 19 degrees for this period, correct?
Yes, I think that's accurate.
And it also is consistently goes as high as 24 degrees Celsius, or even actually even over 25 degrees Celsius on some instances. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I think with that, I will look to, I'm not sure what order it makes sense to go in. I guess I will go next with CCRB and Mr. Bivens. Do you have questions for Mr. Evans?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. The parent district?
No questions for us at this time.
Thank you. ID number 1.
No questions.
And Alisal Guest Ranch.
Thank you. No questions.
All right. I think that I guess I will turn back.
Ms. Kinsey,
I'm
would
sorry,
other,
Ms. Hall.
yeah, so would other parties be able to ask Mr. Evans questions on cross?
Well, I don't want to, what I want to avoid is having friendly cross. In that I don't think that necessarily is productive, but let me, well, I'll give you a chance to, because I would allow redirect from the, so you, I think that's, I'll allow it here if it's limited. Ms. Hall, if you have questions for Mr. Evans.
I have 2 short lines of questions for him.
All right, let's see where this goes.
Okay,
Mrs. Sullivan is listening, so she can tell me if we stray too far.
Okay, Mr. Evans, hi again. I'm Maggie Hall for California Trout. I just wanted to clarify, as part of your testimony for this hearing in this matter, did you complete any detailed in-stream flow analysis yourself?
I did not.
Okay. And I was wondering, Ms. Mullen, would you be able to share the proposed permit terms that the fisheries entity submitted? It's not an exhibit number, but it was the proposed permit conditions submitted along with the case in chief exhibits.
And maybe I'm going to proactively, Mr. Evans, did you submit any testimony about the proposed permit terms?
There was nothing within my case in chief testimony that spoke directly to the terms put forth.
So I think, Ms. Hall, here's my concern is that because it's in some ways friendly cross, I think we need to stay within the scope of his direct testimony at this point. But it sounds like we can get to this on rebuttal in any case. So I think we should defer it. Does that make sense to you? I'm not sure where you're going yet on the permit, but I'm anticipating.
And Officer Kunze, this is Tilden Kim for the city, and you beat me to the punch. I was going to make that objection that it's friendly cross, and I mean, even if it's redirect, I don't know if it's even within the scope of the cross-examination that was provided by Mrs. Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Beal, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm afraid I'm trying to play catch up here. I am unable to find the city's cross exhibits on the AHO website. I did note the city's email when they first came out, and I could not find them at that time, and then meant to check back, and I'm still not seeing those.
They should be moved over now. What we do typically with exhibits that are going to appear on cross, since normally, you know, if we were in person, the normal protocol would be you hand those out around the room. So we hold them in the upload folder and then move them over to the download folder once they've been introduced on Cross. So my team is working in the background. They should, we try to do it simultaneously so that you can see them, when they're brought up on the screen. But if they're not there now, they should be there shortly.
Okay, well, I have been keeping an eye out, and I'm just still not able to find those. So it feels, since those were supposed to be shared with everyone in advance,
Well, that's what I was trying to clarify. They're not shared in advance. The exhibits introduced on Cross are not shared in advance. They're we leave them in our upload folder, and then they're distributed. They're made available once they're introduced on Cross.
I see.
But they should be available now. My team is moving them over as we speak. Thank you. I can't, Ms. Mullen, if you would take this down, please. I just can't see the room. Thanks. So I think Ms. Germanario or Ms. Hall, I think what I would like to do is table this line of questioning until rebuttal, and we can attempt to return to it then.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn back to Ms. Germanario. And based on the cross-examination, do you have redirect for Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you. And if I may, would it be possible for us to view the new exhibits Solvang provided to facilitate?
Yeah. 186. So we'll have Solvang 186 and Solvang 178 ready to go.
Right. Okay. Can we please have Solvang 186?
And let me just confirm with my team, are those now available on the AHO FTP site?
Give me about 20 more seconds.
Okay.
Just copied them, yes.
Okay. They should now be available in the Solvang exhibit folder.
Yeah, I do want to note for the record, I believe as of this morning, or yeah, we weren't able to access these prior to this questioning.
Right.
Thank you. So Mr. Evans, turning to paragraph 11 of your testimony, is there anything further you would like to, well, first of all, in general, is there anything you would like to respond to that came up during the cross-examination?
Yes, I do. I would like to comment. In my review of relevant documents in preparation for this testimony, within CDFW exhibit number 16, which is the 2022 annual report from the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board, there is evidence of deployed dissolved oxygen loggers that are placed to continuously record the levels of dissolved oxygen in pools in places where nighttime levels did reach 2.09 milligram per liter. And fish were found in these same habitats. And this is actually presented on page 50 within that CDFW 16. I would also like to comment that I have conducted personally, with assistance from the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board, several fish rescues within various portions of the San Ynez River for habitats that may have become isolated. During those relocations, within summer of 2020, we did remove fish from pools that during the day with a handheld water quality meter, we were recording less than 2 milligrams of liter per oxygen. So that's my direct evidence of fish being able, or of Omicus being able to sustain for short periods of time, extremely low levels of dissolved oxygen.
And if I may, Ms. Kinsey, I just want to note for the record that CDFW, I believe 16 was excluded. Just want to make sure we're not relying on excluded testimony or to excluded exhibits. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, that was Cal Trout, apologies.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Evans, is that all for now that you wanted to respond to? Can I proceed with questions or?
Yes, that was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to the specific exhibit here, Steve, sorry, Solvang 186. Can we go to page 38? I think that was one of the pages for questioning.
I think we were on PDF page 38, I think.
Okay. And if I may ask you, Mr. Evans, prior to this cross-examination, you hadn't had the opportunity to review this document, Solvang 186, is that correct?
That is correct.
And would you say it's accurate? You don't have all the facts you'd need to evaluate whether the dissolved oxygen standards in this document are reliable?
Yes, I would agree with that.
In your professional scientific judgment, are there reasons to question the dissolved oxygen standards that are set forth in this document?
Yes, I believe so. My first initial thought when presented with this document during cross testimony was I am not certain the species specifically that this was tested on. It listed salmonid. This includes a number of different species which are adapted to different conditions throughout, for example, the west coast of the United States.
Thank you. And do you think the age of the document or the date of the document is relevant to whether it is the best available science on dissolved oxygen standards?
I believe that it may be a factor due to a focus in salmonid research historically being taken place in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and areas that have not focused specifically on the unique conditions that we experience in Southern California and Southern California steelhead.
And is it fair to say the science that you reference in paragraph 11 of your written testimony is significantly more recent science on dissolved oxygen levels required to support omicus?
I believe that is correct. I'm trying to recall the date on this exhibit was, I believe, in the 80s or so.
Right. I could help you out. Solvang 186, which is on the screen, was 1986, and then you referenced some scientific literature, CWW6, Moyle 2002, CWW8, Sloat Osterbach 2013, CWW9, Boaton 2015. So first of all, if you want to comment on those papers and your thoughts on whether those are more reliable or not, the items that you cited.
I believe that those would represent the best available science. And I believe that those are more focused directly on Southern California steelhead, the climate and the conditions here, and would be the most applicable for this exact question and case.
Thank you. And do those does the literature you cite discuss the particular timing of how long there can be deviations from the range of 2 to 5 milligrams per liter, and steelhead still, persisting.
I don't believe the research cited specifically looked at the duration that could be sustained without negative impacts. But I would have to double check the literature directly for you.
Okay, thank you. And then if we could move to, I apologize, I don't know if there was an exhibit number for the dissolved oxygen chart. I believe it was July 2020 as a starting date.
The
Remind me.
Solvang 178, the series of slides.
Yes, yes.
That was Solvang 178, I believe.
Thank you. If we can bring those up. Yes, thank you. Okay, Mr. Evans, I believe you mentioned, or you started mentioning an issue regarding calibration relevant to dissolved oxygen, the accuracy of dissolved oxygen measurements. Is that correct?
Yes, I mentioned that I'm not familiar with the gauge infrastructure that is used to record dissolved oxygen at this USGS gauge. I can speak to my own experience using handheld water quality meters that do require routine maintenance and calibration. I was simply stating that I'm not familiar with the system that's in place, so I can't speak to the accuracy of it.
Okay, thank you. Is it fair to say that measurements of dissolved oxygen gathered in the manner shown here via the gauge may be subject to many factors that would reduce the accuracy, just from your knowledge of that?
One thing, what's shown here is the temperature, not the dissolved oxygen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Maybe we can, I don't know if this is a middle slide, Ms. Mullen, if we can go to the dissolved oxygen slide we looked at, which could be, thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan, you know your slides.
Yeah, well, no, I was actually going to interject with an objection that
Okay,
this question calls for speculation. Mr. Evans has already stated that he doesn't have personal knowledge of the calibration techniques of this particular gauge. So any further questioning about what those calibration or, what the mechanics of the sampling at the gauge would be speculation.
Well, let's thank you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Ms. Mullen, can you back up one more slide, please? I think this is the one we mostly looked at. And then I will ask Ms. Germanario, I got lost in the slides. Would you please repeat your question, and then we can address possibly Ms. O'Sullivan. Well, we'll address one way or the other Ms. O'Sullivan's objection. Or if you'd like to revise the question, you're welcome to.
Okay. Yeah, I believe this is what I was intending to ask about. Are there factors that would affect the accuracy or reliability of these measurements? But I think we've been over that. Let's see. Mr. Evans, do you have any other comments or responses in regards to the cross-exam questions?
I do not.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn back to you, Ms. O'Sullivan. Do you have any additional questions based on the redirect we just heard?
No, I do not.
All right, thank you. And I think with that, we have concluded. I wanted to thank you, Mr. Evans, for joining us today. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate very much having you here with us late in the day, and you are excused. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think I will look to, let's see, where are we? Ms. Germanario. We've gone through CDFW's witnesses. I'm sorry, I don't have the list. I didn't think we'd get this far. I don't have the list of the next witness, but I think it's not a CDFW witness. Or who is our next witness on the fisheries entities list?
I believe it's Dr. Trush.
Okay.
Is that correct, Nina?
That's what I have as well. Thank you.
If I may, Ms. Kenzie, I just want to, there is another CDFW witness, correct, Mr. Hansen? We're just doing him separately.
Yes, let me, I can pull up. This was let's lay out our order of witnesses here. I think I sent it in an email, but I may not have gotten this far.
Yes, Officer Kunze, this is Tilden Kim. I believe you did send it an email, I think last Thursday.
That sounds about right. Just a moment.
Ms. Gunze, this is Gary Kvistad. You sent it on Friday, November 3rd at 4:03 p.m.
Yes, late in the day. That sounds about right.
And I got the list here if you want me to tell you what's on it.
Sure, let's tell it. Why don't, please. Oh, I now I have it, so you don't need to tell me. I just found it. So we have been through our City of Solvang witnesses. So that was excellent. Mr. Demuha, we have reserved for later. Mr. Evans, we just completed. And then I have Dr. Trush from Cal Trout. After that, I have listed Mr. Bush and then Mr. Hansen. So I believe that is the order we will proceed in unless anything comes up and there's a reason to change that order. So Ms. Hall, I will turn to you, I believe. Do you wish at this time to give an opening statement for your client?
Yes, very briefly.
Please proceed.
Great. So my name is Maggie Hall and I represent California Trout in its protest of the City of Solvang's petition to amend permit 15878. California Trout is a nonprofit organization committed to recovering resilient wild populations of salmonids and the conservation of healthy waters for a better California. The Southern California steelhead is one of the most endangered fish species in the United States, and their population levels have only continued to decline since being listed. As California Trout's expert, Dr. William Trush, demonstrates in his direct testimony, the city's project threatens this already imperiled species, and revised permit conditions are critical to ensure protection of steelhead and other public trust resources in the San Ynez River. I will focus on hearing issues 1, subpart C and D, and hearing issue 3. Cal Trout will address the remaining hearing issues in its closing brief as appropriate. With respect to hearing issue 1, sub-issues C and D, the State Water Board should not approve Solvang's petition to change water right permit 15878 as currently proposed, because it would unreasonably affect fish and wildlife while failing to protect public trust resources whenever feasible. If approved, the proposed permit contemplates significantly greater diversions of 2.84 CFS compared to what the city is currently diverting. Dr. Trush's testimony shows how these diversions during critical times of the year negatively affect habitat attributes like pool connectivity and the quality of main stem San Ynez River channel rearing habitat, both essential for steelhead. His testimony further indicates that the proposed diversions limit critical steelhead migration and passage windows. Regarding hearing issue 3, if the State Water Board approves this change petition, then it should adopt the proposed terms and conditions that the fisheries parties jointly submitted. Specifically, permit conditions 9 and 10, which establish triggers for ceasing pumping, are necessary to minimize adverse impacts to public trust resources, including steelhead. These proposed conditions are based on Dr. Trush's review of the project and his vast knowledge of flows and river conditions necessary for steelhead migration and rearing. Moreover, the evidence shows the city can feasibly meet its water needs under these terms. In fact, the city bases its future water needs on historic water usage, which is substantially higher than the actual water usage over the last decade. Therefore, the evidence demonstrates that this petition threatens an already imperiled public trust resource, and revised permit conditions are needed in order to protect the species. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. At this time, are you prepared to call Dr. Trush?
Yes.
And I believe I see Dr. Trush on the video, and I've asked my team to, if I may, give you a more formal title. There we have it. Welcome, Dr. Trush. Thank you for joining us late in the day. Good afternoon. It's still afternoon. If you would please raise your right hand and I will administer the oath. Dr. Trush, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Ms. Hall, with your witness.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. William Trush, California Trout's expert witness. His direct testimony has been submitted as CalTrout Exhibit -3, and his slide presentation that will accompany his oral summary was submitted as CalTrout Exhibit 2. However, he does plan to address slides not in the exact order presented. Apologies for that, but he will note which figures he intends to refer to as he proceeds. He's prepared to give an oral summary of his direct testimony. So Dr. Trush, please proceed.
And can you just repeat, Ms. Hall, the exhibit number for his slides?
Exhibit 2, CalTrout 2.
CalTrout 2, thank you.
So I think we could go ahead and pull that up, and I believe figure 2 on slide 3 will be the first one referenced, but Dr. Trush, feel free to direct.
Great.
Okay, let's go back to that first one anyway. I'll start with that because it's fun to look at. So I'd like to give a little bit more of an introduction of who I am. I got my undergrad from Penn State and my master's from Virginia Tech working on benthic invertebrates. For my PhD, I wound up in Berkeley and started to work on fisheries. And what I found out almost immediately is that I couldn't be a stream ecologist unless I understood how streams worked physically. How could I claim that I could understand an ecosystem if I didn't understand that? Well, Berkeley just happened to have a pretty good hydrologist, geomorphologist, and that was Luna Leopold, Aldo Leopold's son, and who's better known as the, what do they call him, the father of the father of geomorphology. And so I developed a lifelong relationship with Luna until he died in 2006. So my whole career has been how to combine the physical and the biological all under the umbrella of the annual hydrograph. And so I've been doing that on quite a few different streams. And so that, and then presently right now, I'm working as the scientist for the State Water Resources Control Board on the streams in Mona Lake Basin and how to bring back those ecosystems there as well. So the ideas that I learned from Luna and his dad are what I'm applying to there down in Mona Basin, which I was there last week, and this project. I also wanted to say that once I left my consulting company, that's when I had the job working on the Santa Ynez River. And I was asked by NOAA to take a look at the migration and if there be ways to improve it. So all of this is combined together into what I've learned to become. And this slide here has a lot of meaning to it. I don't know if anyone knows how long a dollar bill is, but it's 156 millimeters. And so can I have the next slide? Figure 2, sorry. Okay. This is what we call a smolt to adult return curve. And so if you look at 156 millimeters on the red dot, or what color that is, red dot, at that length, they predict that you would get a return rate of, geez, this screen is overlapping it a little bit, 0. And I can't see it. Anyway, it's a small return rate, and it results in 5 adults returning for 1,000 smolts entering the ocean at a size of 156 millimeters. So it's convenient to think about it as a dollar bill. Now, if we get it bigger, again, I can't see the length, the survivorship on that because of the bar over here and all the people's faces and stuff in it. But in other words, you see that down there, it says 10 adults returning for 1,000 smolts. I look at this diagram as the entire game that we're trying to achieve here. The only way we're going to get big smolts and healthy smolts, because health is much of it is any other aspect to it than just length, that unless we get decent sized length and lots of smolts, there's no chance of recovery. None, zero, nada. And right now we're definitely at that point. And so any efforts made to improve growth, to improve the ability to migrate downstream, to not think about migrating downstream for the smolts as simply a little minimum depth that they can wiggle their way downstream. They have to grow their way downstream if we have a chance of making this happen. And so it's with that perspective that I thought I could help Cal Trout in this. What I wanted to be able to do, however, is that, showing up with all the agency folks, and I haven't been up to date since I left the San Ynez work, which was around 2014, after the River Institute report that we put out then. And what I wanted to do is to do something very basic to show what the effect is, and not hide behind the standard biologist of saying, oh boy, it's really complex and it's got so many variables and I can't say anything or say much. I wanted to be able to say a couple things with some kind of surety to it. So let me check my time and make sure. And take me to, oh no, let's stop here for a second still. So what I wanted to do was to pick one variable particularly that was very key to this curve. And so with that, let's go to, sorry, I've got to do this since we switched things on. I'd like to go to figure 8. Okay. There's our steelhead. How much data is there? I'm up here in Northern California, and not getting down there's no money for field work. So how am I going to actually do an analysis when I'm pretty darn limited in the first place? And so what I did is that, given all the work that I did on the River Institute report, I really knew the gauging stations down there. I started with water supply paper from 1878, somewhere in there, and I went through every single one of them, all the way through the transition into the state in the early 1960s, to get an idea of just what was available. And one of the things that I had been researching for quite a while now.
Ms. Kinsey, I must object. This level of explanation of how he did his analysis, or I'm not really even sure which part of his analysis he's talking about, Mr. Tresh is talking about, but this is not in his written testimony.
Sullivan beat me to it, but I would join in that objection.
I'm just trying to say what I'm going to do so you know what I'm doing.
No, I understand the purpose of the background, Dr. Tresh, and I appreciate that. But that is the rule. One of the few rules we have in these proceedings is that you stick to the contents and the bounds of your written testimony, including avoiding any additional details. So if we can, I think my understanding is your analysis itself is in your written testimony. So I think if we move to the content of the analysis, that would keep us within the bounds of the lines.
Well, I'm trying to understand. And, when you see the fish and the line there, it says where the results are. I mean, it's hard to not show something like this and have a cogent argument or a cogent presentation of what I'm doing. Well, let's go, since I can't talk about that, and let's go to figure 4.
If I could just interject it, Dr. Trush, I don't think you can't talk about that figure because that is in your testimony. So feel free to explain your analysis and what that figure means to you.
But I was, and there was an objection to it.
And I didn't mean, Dr. Trish, let me try to clarify this further. I didn't mean to prevent you from testifying as to what you have explained in your written testimony. And we can pull up your testimony and just make sure we're within the boundaries here. I think my understanding of the objection was that it was to some of the background as to how you came to your analysis. But my understanding is your analysis itself and what you did is part of your testimony, and you can explain that to me, certainly.
Okay. I'll see if I can just not go backwards and just keep going forwards here.
Okay, thank you.
I understand. So the one variable that I decided to look at that I thought was the least controversial and didn't require me developing riffle crest rating curves and all the other things I wanted to explain. I picked something that you could see right away. And that was how the diversion rates that we have, even small diversion rates, can have major impacts on the rearing of the 0+ and the 1+ fish. And it's pretty surprising, given you got a 650 square mile watershed, and you say, well, gee, what can a 1 CFS or a 2 CFS diversion rate really do? Well, nothing, except when the watershed is so completely overdrafted to start with. So right now we're at a really close point of no water you can really let go of without having major impacts. And so I used this example of the hydrograph in 2022 to show that. And the variable that I picked was not one with a controversial threshold. Oftentimes you signed like, well, even on the 2 milligrams per liters, which is loaded with a lot of, well, I won't go there. But so I decided to pick one that's not seen very often, but it's really basic. And that's when
Ms. Kinsey, I'm going to have to object again to the characterization of the criteria as not controversial. That is not in his testimony.
Okay.
All right, I need to come up here. Let me handle that objection. I think, I mean, I'm not going to, I understood there may be objection. You have objected to it. That's noted for the record. Let's move on and go forward. Go ahead, Dr. Trush.
Okay. What I selected was when the stream transitions from pools to ponds, we've got an incredibly rheophilic species of fish. It loves velocities. And so when we talk about a pool, the pools do have a current that goes through it. And that maintains really high quality for rearing, for food availability, for a whole host of things. But as you get closer to 0 CFS, you eventually wind up where the downstream riffle crest of the pool, so the thalweg at the riffle crest, which is at the bottom of the pool, when it hits 0, you do not have a pool anymore. You now have a pond. There's no water flowing through it, surface flow going through it. So when you start to convert your main stem channel from pools to ponds, you are having an effect on the ability of producing many smolts with healthy smolts with a large size. And and I mentioned the word uncontroversial. It's that when you see 0 CFS on a USGS gauge, that's all you have to do. You don't have to do any hydraulics. You just have to know when it's 0 CFS. And so what you see here is 2022. And the blue line is the USGS gauge at Solvang. So I took out 2 CFS, which really shouldn't be much of a diversion for a river. But the brown is what you see is the 2 CFS diverted from it. And so if you start at the far end there on the far right, June 2nd, 22, you can see that it takes all the way to about March 15th. And in between that, you're at 0. Whereas before, even though it's low, 1 CFS and 2 is not producing a very good pool. You don't have magically good pools and no pools. There's a gradient that goes there as well. So this shows pretty clearly that with a small diversion rate in just this 1 year, you can have a major impact. Now, how do you talk about this graph? And so that's my next figure, which is going to be figure 3. Okay, this is the exact same thing as what you were looking at, but presented in a different way. On the y-axis, we've got riffle crest Thalweg, rather than talking about flow. So I converted the flow to riffle crest depth based on that curve that I started to talk about. On the y-axis, and this throws some folks off, is what we call the exceedance probability. What's the probability of something being equal to or greater than, or the probability of something being equal to or less than? And so what you do is you take all of those flows over a defined time period, and I do this for the winter time and into early spring, and you simply rank the riffle crest depths from largest to smallest. And so if you have 0, it's going to be one of the smallest. There's going to be a lot of them that are going to equally be 0. So what you can see here is very much the effect. You lose over 50%.
You pause for a moment, Dr. Trush. What is the objection?
Again, I believe Mr. Trush is straying outside of the explanation that he provided in his direct testimony. This graph certainly appears in the direct testimony, and he does talk about ponds to pools, and I believe counting the number of days that it would become a pond to a pool. But the explanation that he just provided about the p-values and how he added things up is not in his direct testimony, Ms. Kinsey.
Just how he conducted the analysis to get to the p-values?
Well, the explanation of what this graph is, he just includes the graph without explaining what he's explaining now.
Excuse me while I pull it up. Let's see.
And it's on page 6 of his testimony, Ms. Kinsey.
I don't know how to do it otherwise. I'm just trying to help folks interpret this graph. That's all I'm doing.
I know you are, Dr. Trush, and it would, and hindsight is 2020. It'd be helpful to have the explanation in the written testimony. So I think that is a fair, from what I see here, I think unless Ms. Hall, you care to respond, I think it's a fair objection with respect to this graph.
I would say just to the extent he's saying anything that goes beyond what the graph also articulates, Bill, if you want to just try to focus to what's in the testimony and then in the
Well, I do. I tell folks, I'd say the result of this was a 50% loss in habitat based on a 2 CFS diversion rate. Okay. And if folks don't need to know how that came about, well, okay, but I sure would want to know. So I can keep moving on, but I've got another graph that I'll be doing the same thing for as well. Well, not right away, but fairly soon.
And it's not, Dr. Trish, I just want to be clear. It's not that I don't value your explanation. I absolutely do. I wish it was in your written testimony. It's that I'm here to make sure that there's no element of surprise, although this may not be very surprising as to how you constructed these. But you may have a chance to explain some of these further. But if you would please try to stick to what's in your written testimony, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm certainly trying. I'm trying right now.
I'm sure you are.
All right, well, let's just see what happens. Let's go to figure 5. Okay, in figure 5, I followed this up with showing that the results from the 2020 are plotted there. Now I can say that, right? What we just saw, that those two hydrographs are the same ones we just looked at, one undiverted and one diverted. The other 4 hydrographs you see there is during one of the most severest periods of drought ever recorded, between 48 and 1951. And so you can see that that section of the main stem is less than the most severest drought that I could find in the record. So that gives you an idea of just how close this section of the stream is to not being capable of meeting the requirements for that smolt to adult return curve to bring back the fish. And you could ask yourself, well, what kind of flow was 2022? And let's go to figure 6. In figure 6, I won't explain it, but it's called an exceedance probability curve. And you can see on there that the 2020 flow, 2022 flow, sorry, you can see what kind of annual inches precipitation it is. But I would have to explain it. And so let's move on. So let's see here. Let's go back to figure 8. Okay, I won't explain it, but what that curve is our depths at a given flow. So when we start looking at, now we're on another phase of the life history, which is on the migration and passage of fish. And how can such a small diversion, relatively small diversion rate impact that? And so the fish is presented to scale compared to the X of the y-axis. So that's a real, a 1 foot deep there would just have the tip of its fin sticking out, and you've got 0.2 feet clearance from the channel bed. And what that does is it allows you to apply thresholds so that you can say, well, if it's this deep, it's not deep enough for a fish. In other words, if I said right now, 0.4 feet is what I'm going to use for migration, you'd go, that doesn't look like a very good idea in there. And so I selected a number of depth thresholds, which is presented in figure 9. And I've done this, God, I don't know how many rivers all over the West Coast. But let's go to figure 9. And this gives you some idea of what those depths would be for the different thresholds for passage and migration. Now, this does simplify things because fish swim upstream more than just because of the water depth. They're that rheophilic fish that needs the turbulence to come up. And so oftentimes these depths underestimate, but at least they aren't bad for getting fish up. So I applied some of these thresholds to taking CFS out of another hydrograph, and that's the last one, and I'll be done. And that is, we'll just pass over. Yeah, we'll go to figure 10. So figure 10 is a hydrograph for 2021. And it's not a very big hydrograph, but it's right there during the spawning season. And so as this tool, you would target certain aspects of the hydrograph for certain aspects of the life history. And so not a very big flood, and a long retreating limb coming off it. So let's go now to figure 11. So in figure 11, I used a little bit smaller watershed of flood, and I submitted it to a range of diversion rates from 0 to 5. And so here is what's left of those passages and migration opportunities. The y-axis is a percentage of baseline remaining. So without a diversion, how many days was it flowing at and greater at a high flow for fish migration, or the RCT equals 0.55, which is a struggling fish trying to work its way up as a passage flow, not as a flow rapidly going upstream. And so you can see that if you're at let's say a 3 CFS diversion rate, you've taken away 60%, possibly. Only 60% is left of the days that it would have had otherwise with just a small diversion rate. So, and I didn't think I'd be going through this fast, but let's see here. So in summary, picking two aspects of the life history, both of which are critical to that small to adult return curve and turning the boat somehow, because we are going in the wrong direction. My conclusions. I'm just trying to be careful in case I'm saying something wrong here.
Take your time.
I made the mistake of undoing the clip between these pages.
I understand that.
Yeah, I know. I admit it. So the proposed, this is at the very end of my written testimony, just to be clear. The proposed diversions would substantially increase risks during critical periods in steelhead life history, especially whenever stream flows are already naturally receding and being overdrafted mid-spring through early fall. And it's natural. You got the recession limb going on. So when we start taking flow during a natural recession limb, what do we expect to get? More harm to the fish. This includes reducing adult steelhead upstream passage and migration opportunities and connectivity for steelhead moving downstream. Proposed terms 9 and 10 will minimize risk to the struggling population.
Thank you, Dr. Trish.
If I'm just learning some of these aspects to testifying here, I think.
Well, no, as we all are. So I appreciate your efforts, and I appreciate you being here today. And I also very much appreciate that you will be going through cross-examination, which isn't usually anyone's favorite. So in an advance, thank you for tomorrow.
No, I got cross-examined by Westlands Water District on the Trinity. So
all right. Yeah. I think at this point it is 4:45, so it's probably time for us to break for the day. And I think we're all ready for that. But in the last few minutes, is there anything we should talk about in terms of our ordering for tomorrow? Or anything we need to discuss for tomorrow? I did warn you, I think I'll probably be just giving a half-hour break for lunch since it's a short day. That's my intent.
Ms. Kinsey, I do have a question. Is it your intention that Mr. Demuha we would hold his direct testimony until after resolution of the issue we discussed? Okay, so would not be going tomorrow regardless.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for that, for asking. Is there anything else we should discuss? All right, then I'll give you all back 14 minutes. Yes, Mr. Kim.
Yes, Officer Kunze, I just want just clarification. So we're going to start at 9 tomorrow and a hard stop at 2. And I'm sorry if I'm being optimistic, but if we get through all the fisheries witnesses tomorrow, with the exception of Mr. Demuha, then we would be done at whenever that time that concludes, if it's before 2 o'clock.
I think that's fair. Give us yes, let's do that.
So in other words, the city should not be prepared to put on rebuttal testimony.
That's exactly it. No, you don't need to be prepared for that.
Okay,
I'll give you that relief. Yes.
Okay,
We'll
thank you
start
for that
putting little
clarification.
goals for ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you for both of those questions. I'm looking to the room.
I guess one more scheduling question.
Yes.
So either way, we will continue on the 29th with Mr. Demuha. Does that sound right?
We won't hear from Mr. Demuha on the 29th because I think I had agreed that we would only proceed if we still had witnesses for the city on the 29th because of some scheduling conflicts with Aqua. So I think our next available date would be, if I'm taking this off the top of my head, but I believe is it the 4th?
Yes.
So it would be December 4th, I believe, is when we'd hear from Dr. Demuha, unless when we meet, we come up with some alternate proposal. But I would make sure that everyone is available for that. I realize you may not be available for the status conference, so we wouldn't make any decisions without you. Did I introduce any confusion with that discussion?
So at this time, should we not hold the 29th and 30th anymore, or should we keep those reserved?
I'd like to make that decision at the end of the day tomorrow, just to see where we are. Thank you. And
Yes.
then yes, and then we'll try to release them if we can. Yes.
We
Mr. Kim.
will all have questions about what the next steps are when we get towards the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay, that's why I have a feeling we won't really be done early.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to close. Thank you to all of our witnesses who appeared today. I really appreciate it. And I will see all of you at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we will get started. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys.